Associate Transportation Engineer Kevin Chen, Mark Spencer of W-Trans, and the other members of the consultant team, Nick, Andre from W-Trans, Hugh from Alta, and Katie from Enviro Issues. And we would like to start off with public comment. And I asked staff, where should public comment stand in their speaking? Here? Okay. We'll designate this as the public comment area, if that's all right. And we'll start off with Bill Barron, and after that, Sandra Barron. And is this limited, I assume, to 3 minutes, as we usually do? At which point is someone keeping time for us? Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to talk to Project 48. That's the suggestion that a bus lane be added down the middle of Willow Road between Middlefield and Durham Street. There are substantial errors in the draft TMP, including the most recent provision which we put out. I read all of the documents. And in regard to Project 48, there's a major omission. There's a major omission in the document. This is on page 121. Where it says Central Area Project Discussion, it says, below is a list of projects in the Central Menlo Park area which require consideration of trade-offs if implemented. And it starts with number 45, then jumps to number 53, on up to 117. But where's 48? 48's missing. Here's what's missing. Willow Road between Middlefield Road and Durham Street, reversible bus lane. This project will eliminate on-street parking for the residential neighborhoods along Willow Road and remove all of the meridians and bulkheads. It will effectively destroy the residential and suburban ambience of the neighborhood, encourage speeding, impede pedestrian and cyclist crossings, constrain property ingress and egress that will displace elderly and mobility-impaired residents and put school children at risk when walking or cycling to and from their school and athletic events. I find it odd that it's missing. There are other problems with the document in regard to Project 48. The classification of the street between Middlefield and Durham, Middlefield and Coleman is incorrect. That is zoned residential. It is a residential area. I understand from reading the documents that the error transferred from the 2016 circulation element of the Menlo Park General Plan, and that should be repaired. The problem is that it's classified as an avenue mixed use. That is not the case. It is better classified as a neighborhood collector, and that can be seen from this graphic which is provided by the consultant and a couple of pictures that I snapped when I was out walking my dog. Take a close look at that. A traffic pattern analysis is missing. I'm out early every morning walking my dog, both early AM and mid AM. And traffic heading southbound is very rarely tied up. Therefore, we're only talking about northbound tie-ups for the late afternoon rush hour. The congestion is not like a few years ago, where it just sat there and persisted. Instead, it oscillates in about 20-minute half cycles. I'll take my dog for a walk mid-afternoon, late afternoon. The traffic will be tied up. I'll go to the park, come back 20 minutes later, and the traffic is moving. I believe the reason why it's different today than it has been in years gone by is because of ways. That's probably the delay in the information transfer between when motorists know that the road is tied up and they should take alternative routes rather than just loading up the road even more. A rider benefit is missing as far as what is the net gain from this project? Well, since we're only talking about northbound traffic, northbound buses, southbound doesn't count because it moves in the morning, and in the evening, the only buses are 10 Samtrans buses that would be affected with riders on them. The shuttle buses, the corporate buses, they're headed south with passengers and empty coming back, empty northbound in the evening coming back. So if you want to grind up a residential neighborhood in order to get an empty bus through faster, then you've got a great project on your hands with 48. There is no negative impact analysis. School children are pulled across Willow from both sides.
Oh, they say that you're 3 minutes.
I'll donate my time.
Excuse me, I already handed a card from Mark. You don't have to. Somebody else donated their time already. I told Keith who took the card.
Was that
Thursday.
Sandra?
No,
I haven't.
No way.
Somebody's donated their
the one
time to me.
My apologies. Go ahead.
May I help you?
Sure.
So this is my way. If you just look down,
That one?
you know. Here's one, and there's another one. There's another one too.
She said that one's not done.
But this is a
That is finished. Oh, that's donation for Sandra. Okay.
donation.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry about that. You got the 3 minutes.
You're,
Starting in just a moment.
there is no negative impact analysis. School children are pulled across Willow Road from both sides of the neighborhood. When Project 48 creates unsafe conditions, those children are going to end up in vehicles rather than on foot or bike, totally defeating any net gain from helping the buses out. Not that there are many buses to be helped out. Emergency vehicles will have no passage for accessing homes along Willow Road because the spare parking space is now used for vehicles to pull into. When an emergency vehicle is approaching, will not be available. Homes not on Willow can still be accessed via Santa Monica Avenue, which parallels Willow between Middlefield and Coleman. It's only the homes on Willow Road which will be put at danger by this 48 project. Thank you. I hope you draw the project over.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would you like to leave those notes so I can give them to staff? Or would
email
you like
them.
to email them?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, Sandra?
I'm speaking for myself as well as reading a letter from one of our neighbors.
She can have my extra time.
And so, as far as I'm concerned, first of all, as a mother, and I think that there are a lot of parents that are here right now, my daughter rode her bike to Menlo Atherton. She had to cross Willow every morning, and she's grown up now, but this was an important part of her getting to high school. And she didn't do it when she was younger, because I was nervous even then. But she wanted to when she was older. If I, as a parent, and there are many parents in this room and grandparents too, if I was worried about my daughter crossing that street with what you plan to do with that street, I would be up in arms. Because our children and grandchildren are our most precious resource. you are putting them in danger. This is a misguided plan. It's going to increase accidents. One woman with whom my husband just spoke over the last few days, who doesn't live on Willow, she lives on a surrounding street, said that a car had come within a few feet of her child when she was trying to get to the Upper Laurel campus. Not her, but her child, who was on a bicycle. There is something very, very wrong with how this plan was constructed, with what your consultants did with this plan, and why there has been no information whatsoever that we have had about the nature of this plan. And I find that somewhat mysterious, having been a consultant myself. So that's about all I have to say as a parent, and I hope sometime a grandparent. Now I'm going to read you a letter from one of our neighbors. His name is Joe Afong, and he asked me to read this to you tonight. Dear Commission members, I would like to bring to you my concern and misgiving on your proposed project number 48. Our family has been living on Willow Road for more than 11 years. We live on the residential section of Willow Road between Clover and Gilbert. We have always considered ourselves as part of the neighborhood and enjoyed sharing our lives with our neighbors. We do our part to contribute to the neighborhood. Most recently, when you closed off the inner streets to through traffic and forced the commute traffic onto Willow Road, we endured the extra traffic and inconvenience. We are making sacrifice and doing our part for the neighborhood and have never complained. That's what he said, never complained. But when you propose to take away the street parking in front of my home, I must speak up. Our family and friends use those parking spaces in front of our property on a daily basis. Having street parking is a common expectation of a residential neighborhood. Taking away my parking spaces creates tremendous inconvenience for us and will severely curtail the reasonable enjoyment of my property. Then he says, turning Willow Road into a thoroughfare will decrease the value of my home, which is the largest part of my life savings. And I might add to what Joe has said, it'll decrease the property value of the surrounding homes as well, not just on Willow Road. When I know you want to turn my street into a thoroughfare and negatively impact my life savings, I must speak up. And he goes on, when you make Willow Road less safe for my family, I must speak up. Traffic speed on Willow Road is already too fast for a residential neighborhood. Turning Willow Road into a thoroughfare will encourage drivers to go even faster, resulting in higher likelihood of more serious accidents. The proposed elimination of the street parking will put vehicle traffic next to the pedestrian sideway. It will be less safe for pedestrians and make it much less enjoyable to walk. And I see Joe, just as my husband, walking up and down the street with his dog when he's not at work. When you propose to take away the medians in Bull Bar, I must speak up. The medians in Bull Bar are features installed to give our street a residential feeling. And they also act to slow down traffic and deter drivers from driving on the parking lane, which I've noticed a lot of drivers seem to drive on that parking lane and in the bike lane, where kids are, and cyclists going back and forth to businesses on the other side of Willow. Taking them away is taking away the residential nature of our street and is detrimental to our neighborhood. When you make Willow Road a thoroughfare, it will also have a negative impact on the surrounding areas. It will increase traffic in all of the Willows neighborhood. And I will add, for a misguided policy, you're just sending out an invitation to all of the surrounding traffic. Come on everybody, come on to Willow Road. All right? And that's what's going to happen. But that wasn't what Joe said. What Joe said, it will increase traffic in all of the Willows neighborhood, increasing the west side of Willow Road. It will encourage more vehicle traffic on the west side of Middlefield Road, making the west side of Willow Road part of this thoroughfare system. And I would have to say, if something happens to Willow Road, it's not going to stop at Middlefield. And I wonder what's in store next. That's what I see. What are the benefits of your proposal then? After reading and thinking through your proposal carefully, I came to the conclusion that turning our section of Willow Road into a thoroughfare will not provide the benefits you envisioned in your proposal. Here's why. There will still be just 2 lanes for commuting vehicles without any increase from the current vehicle carrying capacity. The cause of congestion on Willow Road is the area around Highway 101 and is not the residential section of Willow Road between Clover and Gilbert. The change in lane configuration will not help alleviate the congestion on Willow Road. The provision of a dedicated center lane for emergency vehicles and buses will not benefit emergency vehicles very much. The existing configuration with a bike lane and parking lane allowing vehicles to pull over for emergency already provides an adequate avenue for emergency vehicles to go through. The proposed lane configuration will be a real problem if a bus and an emergency vehicle meet head-on.
They say you're out of time, but go ahead and quickly finish the letters.
Well, I think I have some more time, but thank you. But I will quickly finish.
That was 6 minutes? Okay, that's fine. So you are out of time, but please go ahead and finish.
Thank you. So once again, the proposed lane configuration will be a real problem if a bus and an emergency vehicle meet head-on. Neither of them will be able to pull over because there is no parking lane for the vehicles to pull over. A long-term solution for emergency vehicle access for the city to pursue is to request Facebook to provide for a fire station east of Highway 101. Facebook, with its population size, poses a great demand on the city resources, and it is a reasonable request to ask for the company to pay for the city's infrastructure that they're benefiting from. I added. The revenue the city receives from Facebook's operation can help pay for the staffing of the new fire station. And his last bullet point. There are only a handful of buses being delayed by the congestion on our section of Willow Road. The congestion is in the eastbound direction in the afternoon for perhaps 2 hours a day, 5 days a week. There are very few riders on the affected buses. So the number of bus passengers who will benefit from the proposed street configuration is very limited. It is a high price to ask the residents to pay for such a small benefit. I urge the city to do a study to determine the exact number of riders who will benefit from this proposal and then weigh it against the cost to residents. He wants a cost-benefit analysis, and I think that makes sense. His last paragraph before his thank
Okay,
you.
we need to,
I'm trying.
okay.
I have a sore throat. In summary, the proposal, project number 48, to make the residential section of Willow Road between Clover Lane and Gilbert Avenue is ill-conceived. The residents on this stretch of Willow Road have to pay too big a price for very little benefit. Making this stretch of Willow Road a thoroughfare actually has much broader implications, including increased vehicular traffic on the west side of Willow Road. I urge the city to recognize that our section of Willow between Clover and Gilbert as a residential street and is an integral part of the residential Willows area. Please do not make our section of Willow Road a thoroughfare and in the process destroying our life savings and quality of life. And thank you for your time. And he signed it, Joseph A. Fong and May Yip. And I will add, it's not just Willow Road, it's the surrounding areas as well.
Okay, thank you. Alice Hahn?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, we have time constraints, but we still try and be respectful to make sure that we hear all your points.
Hi, thanks for listening. I want to know where our representation for District 3 is. That's where I reside.
It is, I'll answer that one. Go ahead, I'm going to hit my.
That's okay. What studies have been made to make it safer for people who have lived on Willow Road? When did anybody ever ask anyone on Willow Road what works for us? Because what works for us works for everybody, and that's what it is. The mindset of our street is this. If you go westbound after Middlefield, you see it come completely different from Willow Road. They have speed bumps, they have trees, they look like a neighborhood. Whereas this proposal, number 48, is trying to make it look exactly the opposite. We have made, Palo Alto make things harder for us, and then we are spending money to try to make it easier for commuters who don't pay city taxes. We do. And yet, our lives are going to be affected by this proposal. I really would like to see, on page 37, you have about walking. Walking is pedestrians. I've asked for decades for crosswalks on Willow Road. Decades. I lived there since 1992. There's nowhere we can cross the street safely between Gilbert and Middlefield. And we need to have more crosswalks because, again, it changes the mindset of drivers. There's crosswalk means there are families, means there are bikers. There are people walking around and they're walking their dogs. And I think that's about it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Daniel Hom and John Cavani.
Oh, okay. Well, the past two speakers in front of me almost took everything that I was going to say, almost exactly, which makes me wonder, do I even read this? But I think I will.
Ditto.
Yeah, you can say ditto as well, but
Yeah, we've heard stuff.
I'll
it's
make it
it's
quick
your
though.
3 minutes.
So my 3 minutes, and I'll just read it. How does adding the reversible lane help with congestion and sustainability? Because my understanding, this project is under sustainability. This project adds buses from where to where. Currently, during non-commute hours, buses are not impeded. The main congestion is at 101 and Bayfront intersection. A reversible center lane provides little relief from Middlefield to Durham. Buses will need to maneuver to stop for passengers regardless. Samtrans buses stop for children to go to school. There's multiple stops along the route. Now, this makes for an unsafe condition, and the distance between Durham to Middlefield is only 0.8 miles, which makes little sense and little advantage. A reversible lane for HOV has no benefits. Vehicles need to merge in and out through traffic. There will be cheaters which will want to use that center lane. It will create an even more unsafe condition, and the center lane will tend to have vehicles drive faster than the 25-mile speed limit that it is currently. Middlefield to Gilbert is a residential area as discussed. Once again, distance is less than a mile. Creating a reversible lane seems to do little for the sustainability. Cost is too high and seems to be little benefit. Currently, Willow Road is being disrespectfully treated as either a parking lot or an expressway. Often cars will tailgate and honk at vehicles obeying the traffic law. This happened to my wife regularly, but our children in the car. Vehicles often use the parking lanes to pass other cars on the right, creating unsafe conditions. These acts have been reported to Menlo Park PD. Enforcement does help, but enforcement isn't there continuously. Residents of Willow Road and their guests and visitors rely on the street parking. The removal of daytime street parking reduces the quality of life and creates unsafe conditions and inconvenience. If parking remains on one side of the street, how does one cross the street safely to go on the other side? It's impossible. So if parking is eliminated completely, where are the vehicles to park for visitors, deliveries, contractors, and whatnot? There appears to be no valid reason for creating a reversible center lane. Congestion does not improve. Sustainability has little advantage. Property value will decrease. Quality of life becomes worse for the residents. Safety conditions are also worse. My wife and I and my neighbor Josh, we've been to the city council meeting to express our concerns about traffic on Willow Road. There's approximately over 60 residents within that stretch. So we ask that we be reminded, or we be included as part of the community. Why should Willow Road and the residents that live bear the burden? Palo Alto northbound traffic from Middlefield constantly turns right into it like a stream continuously. My wife and I came to this same meeting, the OOC meeting in March, to express our same concerns. Maybe I thought it was just going to be a done deed, maybe I thought it would be altered. I see that it has. So, ask if this project truly meets the sustainability goal for greenhouse gas. Answer is no. Ask if this project makes it safe for a 9-year-old to walk to the market. Answer is no. Ask if the $3 sign cost for this project is worth the benefit. Answer is no. It makes things worse. Ask if the center lane will help congestion. I believe the response previously is already no.
I'm
So-
told that the time is up.
Okay, so should Project 48 be on this plan? I think it's no. Last comment, as I went through this, I see the little bars for item 48. Very small print, hard to see, hard to tell what it is. And when you go to the sketch of item 48, it represents a 1 block distance. It doesn't represent the entire distance. So I believe it's a little deceiving, these documents. Thank you.
Thank you very much. John Connie and then Josh Shapiro.
Is there going to be a comment period after the presentation?
Yes,
Okay,
I think so.
I'd rather speak public families.
You want to speak afterwards?
Then,
Okay, no problem. Mark, is it Mc?
Did you say and Josh Spira after?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's me. Am
okay, go ahead.
I now or at?
Uh,
The other
yeah,
Joe,
and
you
then,
go first.
well, John Cavani said that he would rather speak
Okay,
afterwards. So now we have Josh Spiro,
okay,
and then after Josh.
great, thank you.
Sure.
All right.
So are you Josh?
I'm Josh.
Hi,
Hi.
thank you.
Hi, and thank you, members. Resident of Willow Road, 245. Are any of the members on the committee residents of Willow Road? Okay,
I don't know.
all right.
Andrew lives near there.
Yeah, I was near there too.
Okay,
Yeah.
excellent. So I would like to speak about Project 48 in opposition to it, and I want to talk about it through the lenses of public safety, quality of life, and I want to speak a little bit to the process and sort of the democracy or perhaps lack thereof that we're perceiving without District 3 representation currently. So public safety, I have a 3-month-old child, and when we take him on a walk, we're on the sidewalk, and it's scary. It's scary already. So if you're pushing cars over even more, I'm terrified that a car is going to jump up the curb, everyone's texting, we're going to get hit. And I mean, even today, there was construction being done, and we had to be steered out onto Willow Road because the sidewalk was not accessible. And imagine if there's even more traffic on there, and the cars are even closer to the curb. So that really, really scares me. I think from a public safety standpoint, this project going through would be a dereliction of duty. Mrs. Holm already spoke about the speed limit. Cars speed all the time. It's either a freeway or it's a parking lot. Studies show that when you increase flow or try to, increase capacity, it doesn't increase flow. Case in point, the 405 freeway in LA, they added lanes to that. It didn't make it go any faster. So widening roads doesn't improve traffic, it induces demand. We don't want to invite traffic that would normally be going down University or Marsh or Oregon Expressway to take Willow because all of a sudden we have this new capacity. I think that is doing a huge disservice to the residents of our city and to our residential neighborhood. Most people don't think of Willow as a residential neighborhood, but we are. And we're neighbors and we care for each other and we want to be able to enjoy our quality of life. We also have concerns about our real estate value, which is for most people their biggest asset. And I think that this project would definitely negatively impact our real estate prices. Let's see here. As far as the process is going, I already spoke about District 3. I know that you alluded that you talk about that later, but we feel like we currently don't have local representation. I understand that anyone on the Menlo Park City Council would hear us, and that's great, but we deserve our own representative. A project like this that's going to drastically alter our neighborhood and our quality of life and our real estate values and our public safety should not go through, especially if we don't have representation. There's something fundamentally unfair about that. Lastly, I really think that this is a mindset issue. We have a small city infrastructure with big city demands because
When
of...
you hear that noise, it means...
Okay, if I could just finish this
Yeah,
thought. Because of all of the tech companies that are coming in and bringing in workers, the vast majority of people that are using our roads aren't residents of the area. And we like commerce, and that's fine. But we need to rethink the way that people get in and out, or perhaps telecommute, as opposed to trying to put this Band-Aid on it. This Band-Aid won't fix anything, but it will really drastically lower our quality of life. So thank you for serving, and thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Just if I can take a moment before we call the next person, because you have asked about the District 3. That came up before, and our city attorney actually came forward and said that legally as well as morally and ethically, Ray Mueller and I were both elected from District 3. And technically, you're doubly represented because we are still representing the whole city, because the whole city...
We didn't get to vote in the last election for city council.
Well, two groups didn't
Nobody
get
was
to...
up for
Yeah.
election.
Yeah, you can only vote for your own districts.
Right, and so no one voted from either. Legally, you have Ray and me representing that district. If you go online, my personal mobile phone number is listed, and I answer it. It's always within 10 feet, and you are always welcome to call me, and I will always be happy to come and have coffee with you anytime, and I know Ray Mueller's the same. So you absolutely do have representation. So, Mark, and then Anne Sophie after that?
Okay, I'm Mark McBurney. Just echoing some of the comments from the other speakers, I won't belabor the issue. I need to hammer home this thing about no Willow Road residents. I spoke at the last meeting of this committee, and it was kind of blown off, quite frankly, like it's no big deal. It is a big deal. I mean, here's a committee that's playing with our lives, our street. We want to take out the medians, try to remove any semblance of a residential street, and we're supposed to just smile and go along with it? I don't think so. Please, this has happened over and over again. When the fire department wanted to take out the bulb outs, the city staff said, oh, we contacted the stakeholders. When we contacted them, there were no residents on Willow Road who were contacted. What are we to believe? You know, we may have double representation, but quite frankly, I'm not feeling the love, okay? So, again, I implore you, this is a bad idea. It's not needed. And again, echoing one of the comments, why are we pandering to the demands of people outside of Menlo Park? We are the residents. We are the taxpayers. Take care of us. Show us the love. Thank you.
Anne, and then Omar?
Hello. I'm lucky not to use my 3 minutes, so I get bonus points for that. So I live on 236 Willow Road, and I know a few of the neighbors as well as a few of the people on the panel. So you guys know that I am a mother of 4 children from preschool to 5th grade, and I want to ensure that our street does remain safe for my kids and doesn't become even more dangerous than it currently is. So besides the quality of life, the property value that others have addressed, I wanted to touch on again that safety aspect. And so what I wanted to talk about is how I remember that I was a few feet away in the other room, in the other building, maybe 12 or 18 months ago, when there was a proposal around removing the medians and the bulb outs to make our street more accessible to emergency vehicles. At the time I spoke up and I shared my concern about the fact that even though I am very supportive, and I think everybody would be very supportive of making our street accessible to emergency vehicles, I was seeing this as the first step towards making Willow a 4-lane street. And my concern at the time seems to be even more reinforced with today's proposal, because we're not talking about 4 yet, but we're talking about 3. So I was against removing the bulb outs, but I was saying I'm okay with the medians. I'm okay if we make those medians drivable. So removing the existing ones, make them drivable to make it accessible to emergency vehicles works for me. The bulb outs, is it really going to help? Not sure. So I reiterate that concern in my proposal. And while I fully support making our street accessible to emergency vehicles, I echo the concerns of some of my neighbors about the number of people that would benefit from the availability of that third lane for buses. And so I hope that you will consider a proposal that will focus on emergency vehicles, and I'm not so sure that the bus lane requirement is something that will truly benefit the most. So that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Omar?
Well, I think I'm just going to pretty much repeat a lot of what the other speakers have already said. And I'm actually a new neighbor in Willow Road. And what I want to say is that I think that what you guys are trying to do basically resembles another project that is very similar, right? We want to bring the 280 route through Coleman Avenue and other routes in order to bus people into maybe some of the educational institutions. But I think the uproar there was also in regards to security. So I don't think that the ability to actually open up a lane for a bus is also going to be something that we, the neighbors, would want to have, because it will increase the security risk for people. I actually have two kids, 6 and 7, that I hope that at some point we'll be able to bike to school, and doing this will obviously will raise concern on myself. So the other thing is, while you guys are thinking about these type of plans, for which residents are you looking to solve the problem for? Is it for the Menlo Park residents, or is it for the Palo Alto residents, or the residents that come from Fremont that have to get to work into Palo Alto? And so I think that, being a brand new homeowner in Menlo Park, and after paying my taxes, which are pretty high, I think the solution should be for the Menlo Park residents. It's really strange because I used to live in Palo Alto, and there they have basically defined a lot of zoning that will prohibit drivers from other places that don't live in Palo Alto, and they have forced all that traffic through Middlefield Avenue. They have closed all the routes into the streets, for example, like Hawthorne. Right? So if they're able to do that, listen to their taxpayers, why haven't we been notified in advance that this plan is actually in the process? So I want to make sure that it's very clear that it is us, the taxpayers in Menlo Park, that should be benefited from any changes that you do into our streets. Right? Again, very different approach in Palo Alto versus what's happening here in Willow.
Yep, one more. Kirk Bradley?
I was hoping everybody else would say what I wanted to say, but I do have a few things that didn't get addressed. And actually a couple of questions that came from other people's comments that I'm hoping that they get addressed, and so I want to pose them as questions as opposed to just comments. So I guess I actually sent an email to all of you that has everything I have here, so I won't go over everything. I have definitely a lot of concerns with the efficacy of the project and whether it'll actually do what you're hoping to do. But I won't focus on that. I'll focus on the safety concerns, since I think those are the most preeminent, for me at least. So I live on Willow Road, right next. I walk down the street now, and I already feel like I'm in danger. I have 2 children, and they're small, 7 and 4, and we feel like the traffic gets awful close to us now. There are times when the traffic is slowed because someone's trying to make a left turn, and people immediately go around on the other side, invade in on the bike lane and the parking spots to keep moving, and you get situations where the cars are very close to you. And I ride my bike most, probably about a third of the days of the year, and it's happened to me many times where I almost get hit by a car because they quickly come into the adjoining bike lane, and my only escape from getting hit is moving into the parking lane, because I can get far enough away and still not hit the curb. And in this new plan, there won't be that escape. So you'll basically be in a situation where the cars, if they move into that lane at all, the bikes have nowhere to go. And as the cars get close to the sidewalk, it's going to become very perilous to walk on the sidewalks. The other big concern that actually hasn't been mentioned, or very, very briefly, is that I don't really see how I'm going to be able to pull out of my driveway in the morning with the current plan, or the new plan. I mean, right now, I can pull out of my driveway, I can back into the parking lane and the bike lane just enough. Sometimes the corner of my car is still, in case we have kids, so we have a minivan, and it's hard not to get into the car lane now. And so, that little corner that we put in the car lane now, it's fine, people can avoid us, but I don't see how we do it once the car lane is basically all the way over. And so every time somebody pulls out of their driveway, it's going to stop traffic completely on that road. And so I think that's another reason that the FXC is not what people think it's going to be. And then the questions that I wanted to pose from what other people said is, this idea that the emergency lane is going to be able to go one way obviously isn't the case. The emergency vehicles are going to need to go either way.
Sorry, just give you the time.
Sure.
Go ahead.
The emergency vehicles are going to need to go either way, and so in that case where the center traffic is coming toward them, that head-on stop, I don't see how that works. So I'd like somebody to talk about what the thinking was on that, because the idea that buses and emergency vehicles are always going to be going in the same direction, of course, that's not true. And then parking for houses, that was brought up, and it's not something that I thought of, but I literally don't know how someone comes up to the house to just deliver something to my house in this new plan. Where does that Amazon vehicle stop? Where does the post office vehicle stop? I mean, I don't get it. So I need that Amazon vehicle. I think that those two are, I literally don't understand how they'll work. So I'm hoping somebody will answer.
Thank you so much. Oh, one more. They trickling.
Madam Chair, could I make a suggestion?
Yes.
That points have already been made, particularly if they've been made twice, it seems unnecessary to make them a third time.
I really disagree. I think it's important to emphasize things that matter to everybody.
Yes, but you can title the point, I'm also concerned about parking, and I'm also concerned about where FedEx goes. And
That's
that
fine.
has the effect on
You
us.
can summarize it, but you do need
We
to.
shouldn't be
you do need to hear
intimidated,
it.
we get the right to speak.
Right, but you can repeat, and when you're going over 3 minutes, I would point out that you could be considerate to us also. We are volunteers and we are residents, we're part of the team here.
I understand. Eldora Lee?
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry I missed the last speaker, so I'm not knowing whether I repeat anything. I live on Menlo Avenue, and I live mid-block between University and El Camino. And I made some notes about my concerns about the way I have found things online regarding the bike lane concern. So I'd like to bring to your attention some concerns, starting with the planning of the Graders loading dock. I noticed that when that was coming up, the perimeter was very, very small. In other words, what I have discovered living there is that when something happens at one end of the street, it follows all the way to the other end of the street. And so to look at something in a small dish is not to our advantage. The loading dock is not near me, but I'm sure that it would have had some impacts that would have been done differently. Recently, I noticed that plan, and I want to bring to your attention one thing that's very evident to me, and that is the shape of the roadway. Maybe someone has mentioned it already, but it's high in the middle, and when it gets over to the curbs, it's low. Now, I'm thinking about bicyclists going along there. And then in the winter, when we get our winter and spring rains, it floods. It floods like this wide, and it's about 5 inches deep. And I have a choice. I can get in my car and I can drive across the street to go downtown. Or I can walk through the water. I cannot walk around the water because the water doesn't end for another block. And I'm saying, you want to turn this particular place where all this water sits in the middle of the winter into a bike lane? I'd like for you to take that into consideration. There are no storm drains on Mineral Avenue. I mean, most modern cities have storm drains and places like that, and that's not going to help the bicyclists. Another variable is the traffic pattern on Mineral Avenue. Maybe this is the mention. The large, very large, lighter than the street lane is, often block the road when deliveries are made. One cannot see around them to see if the road is clear. In addition, at about 4 or 4:30 p.m., there is a long string of cars headed in the direction of El Camino. Actually, they are waiting to turn left across the traffic mid-block into the Trader Joe's parking lot. So the whole street is organic, and what you do on one end or in the middle or someplace else is going to affect the other parts, is my estimation. So I urge you to take a careful look at the potential problems, and particularly with regard to bike safety. Well done.
Getting into the details of 48, I would like to discuss that after we have the presentation by the state transportation engineer. The one thing I would like to ask staff, because I struggle with this myself, and I know it's an issue across the city. We don't go knock on doors generally to outreach to people, but I know we send out things in the mail. We send out postcards. We post on Nextdoor. What outreach have we done to the people in the Willows area? Because I understand it's frustrating when you kind of pick up on something happening in your neighborhood at the 7th hour. And I also realize it's frustrating when, we do try and communicate, but it hasn't reached the level of urgency where people have noticed. Because people have, we all have kids and soccer and jobs and lives. And so it's hard sometimes to cut through the noise of life to understand something's directly going to. Apparently, I was getting up at 7 a.m. and set it for p.m. So there you go. But can you talk about what has been done, not only for historical reasons, but also to understand what works and doesn't work as we continue to do this? I want to make sure that the neighbors are reached when it's impacting their lives, and they do know when to come out, because it's frustrating for everyone when you feel like you've been left out of the process. Frustrating for the people that have been doing it up to then, and also frustrating for the people that would like to have the input earlier maybe than they should. So can you address that at all for us?
Yeah,
So we've had several different engagement processes throughout the development of where we got to this far. We had some outreach, kind of online open house, and we had some other types of engagement where we went out to different, we did kind of walking workshops, we did some, showed up at some community events where we gathered some input. And then we've also posted meeting information on Nextdoor. We have a public works email list that people have signed up to be on, and so we've sent out communications that way. For this meeting, we did both Nextdoor, that email list, and we also had the City Council Digest. We wrote up something for that as well.
So, just throwing it out there, maybe we have an area of influence, like people who live in this area for blocks, like you live, what, 2 blocks off Willow? And I think, Andrew, you live a block off Willow? That's an area of influence, but where it's directly impacting people, where we're going to take the parking spaces away from their front yard, potentially, something like that. We send out a card. And some of the frustrating things, this is just my opinion, okay, I'm speaking as one person. I find it frustrating that sometimes we get very clever and we market things with cool names, like Connect Menlo. And you look at it and you think, I don't know what this is. You know, because I get so much stuff in my mail. And saying, you know, this is impacting Willow Road. Like, you know, kind of, no kidding, kind of get your attention postcards for the people when it's directly impacting your house. And I know maybe that's overkill, but I'd rather have overkill than underkill, because it helps the process for everybody involved when everybody feels like, I'm just saying, it would be great if as we move forward, we make a note here to try and directly somehow, and I know that we don't have the staff to literally go knock on doors, but sending a postcard or doing something along those lines to make sure that they're aware that this is going to directly impact their lives. Because it does, and it will, if this is something, I mean, I think we're pretty clearly what you've all said.
Yes.
But I also want to make sure that, you know, that we do care. And everyone at this table, as Henry points out, we're all volunteers, we're all working really hard to try and do what's good for the city. And what is good for the city is that much better when everybody's involved. And so I'm sorry that this has happened where you haven't felt as included up to this point as you should have. And I want to make sure I'll work with staff to try and implement something better to make sure that in the future, in particular if it's directly affecting the property, beyond the next door, because I understand, I have kids too. You know, you can't be expected to stalk the city council to make sure we're not doing something to impact your lives. So, Jackie?
Is there a thing, I'm thinking of, I get postcards about stuff that's like planning commission. Is it something like that? Like what already, so when Facebook does something, I get an orange postcard in my mailbox that Facebook's going to do something and I can go to a meeting to talk about it. That's kind of what you're talking about?
That's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
I mean, that's about as much as we can do. We can't individually stop every house to make sure they know.
Yeah.
But we can send them out a clear message in a postcard so that at least you have the opportunity to get involved.
Go to another meeting and talk about it.
Exactly. Exactly.
Got it.
So at this point, I would like to address a lot of what was brought up, but let's take this in order. Christian Choi will provide a presentation along with the consultant team, Mark Spencer of Digitrans, and then we'll facilitate a discussion about this. Would you like to go ahead and do that now?
Sure.
Thank you.
Good evening, members of the committee and members of the public. I'm Christiane Choi, Senior Transportation Engineer with the City of Menlo Park's Transportation Division. And so I'm here to talk to you about the Transportation Master Plan, and I'm going to start out first with just the review of the project's goals and purpose, and then we're going to go into a review of the citywide projects that the committee asked for at the last meeting, and then the discussion of the feedback that we have received thus far and what that meant for changes to the projects, then we'll go into the proposed scoring methodology and the next steps.
Can I ask a point of clarification? So this is our agenda for the full meeting, to the chair?
Generally, I mean, this is our agenda. That's the agenda for her presentation.
Okay. So the public comment again, to the delayed public comments, or people who would like to comment again, will come after
This presentation.
after this 3 hours?
Well,
Yes.
Yeah, so there might be some breaks in here to have some discussion points.
I'm just trying to understand, I'm just adding up time, just to,
Sure, well, I think she's doing a presentation, and then we can take some, we'll take it as a,
is anybody else confused about this? It's all fine, I'm just trying to understand for people who are waiting to comment, when they can expect to be able to comment in this structure, to the chair.
I haven't seen the presentation, so why don't you tell me, will it be appropriate after your presentation to have them?
Yeah, I mean, we can also put in a point where we do, after the feedback, and we go over the changes to the projects. That would be probably a good time to talk about.
So that would be 1 hour and 45 minutes?
I think that hour might include potential for discussion.
I was going to say.
Potential what?
For discussion, so I'm assuming that there might be some time that people.
Why don't we take public comment after the citywide projects in 45 minutes?
Okay.
That sounds good. Very good point. Thank you. Is that all right, or would you like to go?
I'm going to make a brief comment now.
Well, go ahead,
Thank
please.
you. Okay, thanks. I really want to talk about the scoring methodology, not about Project 48. I don't know where, I was hoping to hear it explained. I'm basing everything I know based on the previous report and the staff report. Not to put too fine a point on it, the scoring methodology is totally flawed from a cost-benefit perspective. There are multiple public benefits and costs, and there's a lot of known methodology for doing that. And while the overall structure of what's presented here, we have projects, we have overall goals, and measurement criteria, and we somehow integrate those together and weight them to represent trade-offs. Yes, of course, that's really sort of the only way you can go about these kinds of comparisons. But from the get-go, there's so much that needs to be done. For example, just with respect to the project number 48, this project, it probably should not be part of this entire ranking process. It's totally out of scale and complexity. Involves probably a lot of special issues and outcomes that won't be addressed for the other 178 projects. For example, property values. I didn't notice property values discussed anywhere. I mean, maybe you can do a search on it and it's there. Or the total loss of parking. So, and those are important outcomes. And just to put that in for your one project, and to track it for the other 178 makes no sense. So that there are a number of framing issues like that, and organization of these projects into sort of structured groups or strategies which are more comprehensible seems like essential first steps. The key thing is in doing this, if indeed it becomes some sort of cost-benefit ranking, is to have credible and useful and robust measurement criteria. And I didn't find them there. I found it very hard to track what the meanings of the measures were, what the meanings of what the outcomes were, of how those would be judged. Even though a lot of judgment and simplification is involved here, how these scores were going to be assigned, and then what they would mean. Here's a couple big problems. I saw that there's this 1, 2, 3 ranking, and maybe with kind of a bonus point if a city goal is achieved, whatever that means, if I understood what was written there correctly in the report. Yes, I mean, there'll have to be a lot of new measurement criteria developed to characterize things like loss of parking on the street versus something else like noise or something like that. And those are all different. Those have to be organized, and those could be created by these good consultants. But you can't just start adding and throwing these numbers together. It doesn't make sense. If you say, well, we have a 3-year and 3-year, and we just add those up, that means you're saying whatever that is, whatever that delta is, as the engineers like to say, it's the same as this one over here. Well, that's a trade-off. That's a policy trade-off that should be made by the city council or whoever the decision makers for this process are. And when you just kind of throw everything together like that in one big, love fest, you totally confuse factual judgments and estimates, engineering estimates, with what the trade-offs are that are involved here in all of these projects. So I think something has to be done to slow down and figure out what better measurement criteria are, so that if indeed this is what it's going to be, maybe it won't be. Maybe it won't be this big ranking that it started out as. But if there is kind of a cost-benefit trade-off, those things have to be made clearer so that basically you keep things separate. You keep all these outcomes separate, and you slow things down. You don't combine them all together, which is what I think it looks like it's going to be done pretty much by the staff and the consultants, rather than having having the public look at it to decide what's the value of what's in column 1, 2, 3, and 4 in terms of the outcomes. Probably a lot of what I'm saying here may be opaque because you haven't had a chance to see it. We don't have a clear presentation of it yet on paper. It's just there, so I apologize if I've gotten anything wrong, but maybe we'll learn more tonight and what the details are. But in any case, not ready. It's not ready for prime time. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I just want to first start out with reviewing the project's goals and purpose. So just for background, so the transportation master plan was came out of the general plan update, which is what we call Connect Memo. The council adopted that in late 2016. It included an update to the circulation element for the city, which had a lot of goals and policies related to transportation and circulation for the city, and it included the development of a transportation master plan. And that was the highest priority project coming out of the general plan update, and so that's why we're here today to talk about the transportation master plan. The transportation master plan, how we were going about developing it is we first went out to the community to get some input on what they felt were the main transportation challenges in the city, as well as how do they get around the city. And then we have now identified a bunch of projects, that's what's in the draft working paper of the strategies and recommendations. Then eventually we would prioritize the improvements, which we're going to be talking about a little later on how we are proposing to score the projects. And then after the transportation master plan is adopted, we would then update our transportation impact fee program. And that transportation impact fee is what new development pays to help mitigate their transportation impacts. And those fees are set by land use types. So an office development pays a certain rate versus a residential development pays a different rate. And those developments, they pay their traffic impact fees at the time of the building permit. And so then we collect those fees and use them as needed to help build the improvements that would be identified in the master plan. So I'll just give you an example of our current transportation impact fee. It was adopted in 2009, so it's almost 10 years old now. And so we, at that time, we identified a number of improvements, and that totaled to be about $40 million worth of improvements. And then we looked at how much of the of expected roadway traffic is due to new development versus existing development, because only the new development portion would be attributed to the transportation impact fee, because that's what they would pay. And so at that time, 25% of the expected traffic on the roadways was expected to be from new development. And so currently our impact fees are about $3,200 per new single-family home, or $4.80 per square foot for an office development. So one of the projects in our current transportation impact fee program is at El Camino Real and Middle Avenue. At the time in 2009, we had proposed having an added left turn lane on northbound El Camino Real. So El Camino Real is up and down here, and this yellow is the added lane. And then also an added lane southbound right to go onto Middlefield Road. So that's what's in the current 2009 TIF. And but since that time, we've adopted a number of new plans. The El Camino Real Downtown Specific Plan, which encourages finding new east-west pedestrian and bicycle crossings, as well as our Connect Mental Circulation element, which also prioritizes getting around safely on bike and walk from walking, as well as we have a proposed Middle Avenue bicycle and pedestrian crossing over the Caltrain tracks, which is just parallel to El Camino Real. And so this added lanes on El Camino Real kind of conflict with those new policies and a potential ped bike crossing, which then so right now, if we keep the plan the way it is, the traffic impact fee the way it is, this is the only project that's in there for El Camino Real and Middle Avenue. So what we're trying to look at with the Transportation Master Plan is looking for projects that meet our current goals from Connect Menlo, as well as the Downtown Specific Plan, and that are more appropriate. So some of the goals that we have identified for the Transportation Master Plan, they are from the Connect Menlo circulation element. So we identified 3 goals that we want the master plan to achieve, and those are improvement in safety, which is one of the Vision Zero policy goals from Connect Menlo, which eliminates traffic fatalities and also reduce the number of non-fatal collisions by 50% by 2040. There's also sustainability, which is helping the city to meet their climate action goals. And then mobility choice, which is designing transportation projects which would accommodate all modes and people of all abilities and encourage walking, biking, and transit. We also, based on the input that we received from the community and the OOC, identified 9 prioritization criteria. They range from costs to whether schools are nearby, whether the projects would improve safety, as well as congestion relief, and then reducing greenhouse gas emissions as well.
Jen, did you have a question on this?
I'll wait for you to finish this section.
Okay. And so then just to recap where we've been, as I mentioned earlier.
I'm sorry, Christiane, could you go back to the previous slide just for a couple seconds? Okay, thank you.
So at the end of 2016, the City Council adopted Connect Menlo, and then we started work on the Transportation Master Plan in the summer of 2017, and the council established this committee in August, and we did some community engagement, as I mentioned earlier, where we went out we did some walking workshops, we held an online open house, and we also attended some community events to gather input from the community. And then we started work on the draft recommendations and the strategies earlier this year. And let's see, just this this late summer, early fall, August and September, the committee met 3 times to go over kind of the proposed strategies and recommendations in 3 different areas of the city. To break it up, we went through the north area, and the central area, and the south area, and then at that last meeting of the south area, the committee asked us to bring back their an updated list based on all the feedback that we had received, which is why we're having this meeting tonight. So that's the my part for now. Do you want to?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I actually had an opportunity to meet with staff yesterday, and I prepared a short presentation that somebody has queued up. And I first want to start by telling you that it's a very hokey presentation. I over-enjoy the use of clip art and metaphors, so I apologize in advance. But something that I've been struggling with, and a couple community members, fellow committee members, not any Brown Act violations, a few of us, have been trying to see the forest from the trees with this project, because we really take our role as an outreach and oversight committee member very seriously, and we know that at the end of the day, the council is going to need to have something. That's totally the wrong button. Sorry. Okay, next slide. So this whole presentation has like a tree forest theme going on here, but ultimately kind of taking a step back, as I've been trying to wrap my head around this project and what we're doing here, and I've been in every single meeting that we've had, and I'm still a little bit confused, which is why I had the opportunity to meet with staff. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the council is going to have to vote on this plan. And they're going to have to say, does this plan meet the desires, goals, priorities, vision of the community? And I'm thinking, how the heck are they going to be able to evaluate kind of what they're getting? And what do they need additionally in order to be able to effectively and logically make that kind of a decision? Because that's a big responsibility. And there's a lot of us that have a lot of demands. And how are they going to be able to manage that? So right now we have, the TMP, which is a working document, and it has a tremendous amount of work and thought that has been put into it. And this is where my metaphors start going a little crazy. But I'm thinking of, about trees. Like every project is like a tree. And so we might have a grade separation here and a bike lane over here. And the trees are kind of spread throughout the city. This is just 4 of them. But if we have 180 trees, they're just kind of all over the place. And again, when I think of what's the council ultimately going to get to decide if this effort is going to work for our community, right now they're going to get a lot of trees all over the place, but it's hard to wrap your head around that. I know as community members, you might have a hard time wrapping your head around it. And so how do all those trees kind of add up into this vision? And how can we add kind of a layer or a process step or a lens to this process that'll allow all of us to approach the massive amount of data in a way that we are able to digest and evaluate properly? And also be able to kind of chew and play with and understand. So I started thinking of like a use case. So imagine you have a family in Belhaven and they want to get to Burgess Park. And there are lots of different ages, kind of an 8 to 80 framework. And some of them might want to bike, some of them might want to take the shuttle. Looking at all of these trees all over the place, do we know now, how this plan would work for this family? So if we actually looked at all of the projects and started clumping them into different networks and projects, then we would be able to say, okay, well, we've got all these projects, and we've got 4 really great projects that are going to help this family, but oh my gosh, it might be missing a couple, because now we're looking at it in a way that's kind of at the human scale where we're actually able to wrap our head around. Or we might be able to say, these, even without this one dot, the whole like bike route might fall apart. So you might have on our amazing list of projects, we might have these fantastic pieces, but if we have a broken link in the chain, the whole network kind of doesn't work and falls apart. And all the work that we've done is for naught. So the idea that I discussed with staff yesterday, along with a few others of us, was to package projects in a way that kind of makes logical sense for residents. And hearing from those of you on Willow Road and kind of how you didn't hear about this project, and hearing Pat's suggestion of reaching out to specific constituents when things are affecting them, this type of approach, I think, would help deliver that, because you'd be looking at them in a sensible kind of frameworks, and so different constituency groups would be more inclined to engage and be in dialogue with the city if there was some relevancy of how it was affecting our daily life, and it wasn't just kind of a poster board with a bunch of different projects. So thinking about kind of packaging these, then that leads me to like, okay, well, what is the TMP even, all about? And Christiane did a great job kind of summarizing it this evening. But there really seems to be like two major things, and I almost feel like there might be a little disconnect between how those of us around the table have been thinking about it with the TIF, which is the Transportation Impact Fee, which might be a new concept to some of you here tonight, and the way that kind of our average everyday resident, like my husband, or any of us, kind of is craving in the community, which is kind of like a transportation master plan that's going to give us some relief from the stress and anxiety that we face on our roads every day. So kind of taking the TMP, the TIF being the list of projects that's going to get us that funding from developers. And this is kind of what we've been like in the weeds working on the city, and the goal for this is this money for funding for infrastructure. And then the separate thing is kind of the strategic roadmap that us residents want that provides us connected routes and corridors that make up a safe, sustainable, and citywide network that has mobility choices. And which is going to give us this goal of relief and progress, like we're making progress on something, and an ability to get around town. So the concept is to bifurcate and to kind of separate the two. So take the TIF and kind of deal with the TIF. Like we need that money. We need we're going to need that infrastructure dollars to do any of this stuff. But then kind of do a TMP 2.0 and really look at what the community wants in terms of their vision of how to set up our road network. So the danger here with this whole concept of packaging and stuff is delaying this project, because if we delay the TIF, that means that any development that occurs between now and the updated TIF will have to pay less money to us, and that money won't be able to be spent on things that we currently want to have. So we can't really mess with the TIF and delaying it. So if we start packaging things that makes it easy for all of us, then we have a risk. So kind of like, what do we actually need to do to kind of check the box of the TIF and satisfy those requirements to get that money that we need? And then kind of secondarily, for us community members that want that relief, what can we develop this comprehensive citywide network that's safe? So, is that the last slide?
You have 4 more.
I have 4 more. Okay. So
one more. Sorry, you
okay.
just like it to the end.
Okay. Yeah, we can.
Good.
So basically, I'm curious to know your thoughts on this, and I know staff was doing some feasibility checking with like what that would even look like in terms of kind of splitting apart the two. But I think at the end of the day, I know as a regular everyday resident, and I'm a volunteer, I live here just like all of you, I want my life and the life of my children and my neighbors and future residents of this community to be better. And I want my kids to be able to walk to school or bike to Burgess or go to Hillview or whatever. And I don't want to kind of miss anything or rush that too much. So for me, I want to make sure that the transportation master plan is really holistic and also that we all feel really good about it. So what I'm curious about is whether this project list can just kind of get knocked out. And one thing that we talked about with staff yesterday, and I'd love to hear if this is indeed accurate, was that if something is on the list to get the developer money, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen in the future. It doesn't mean we're actually going to do that project. It's just there is a fail-safe. And if something isn't on the list, that doesn't mean we can't do it either. We can use other funds or grant money or something else. So it kind of takes the pressure a little bit off about getting a perfect list now and allows us as a community to work together to get a TMP 2.0 and a plan that we can all embrace and feel like we had input because we all are able to see the bigger picture, the forest. So there are some things about concerns, and so that's kind of the concept, and I'm curious to know your feedback on that.
Can I comment for clarification?
Yes.
So I thought this was really good, and for those of you that may not be aware of TIF, it's whenever you build something that's going to impact traffic in any way, shape, or form, you have an impact fund. And we want to make sure that that impact is appropriately scaled. What we're talking about with these projects cost a lot of money, and we need to bring that money into the city. And so we need to make sure that the TIF aspect starts so that we don't lose out on the potential funding to make these things happen. Because we can all vote on whatever, nothing has happened unless we get the money in. But I like what you're putting forward. Just to also, Elsie, you said it's a living document. I believe this is going to be reviewed every couple of years. So what is agreed isn't written in stone. It's going to be reviewed because life changes and the city changes and evolves, and it's critical that we recognize that it's not this is it and this is it for the next 20 years. But from what I understand, and please correct me, staff, I wish we had the city attorney here to better define out this. What we need to do to get the TIF process started, and that's a whole process in itself, is agree a certain amount of these are the general projects, and then as you're putting forward, we have these projects, and then we go through, this is how we're going to group them, and this is how we're going to rank them and prioritize them. And to an earlier point, there's maybe a better way of strategically ranking them as we move forward in a separate process. So what we're doing tonight is saying these are generally the projects we want to put forward. Next step, we can figure out how we're going to prioritize them and how we'll group them together, and what the triage is on how they're implemented. Does that reflect well what you were saying? Okay, good. I just wanted to kind of put that in for clarification on where we'd be moving forward with this tonight. And what are your thoughts?
Diane had her thing up, but
Oh, sorry, Diane.
That's okay.
yeah.
Well, I really hope that staff and the city attorney can take this proposal seriously and explore what flexibility we have if the TIF is adopted first, and to what extent we could change that project listing in the future, because I like the idea of this proposal in that it wouldn't delay the TIF and cause the city to miss out on potential funding for new developments, but I think that there is a substantial amount of discomfort with some of the projects on the TMP within the working paper right now. It's a working paper, and it needs a lot more thought and refinement. And if we could take a little more time and do, the TMP 2.0, as Jen calls it, it seems like we would all benefit from that more thoughtful process, but not wanting to slow the TIF down. And I think Project 48 is sort of a good kind of caution sign for the broader TMP working paper that we really can't speed ahead with these projects without a more thoughtful analysis of how the projects affect the people living along them, and also how the projects integrate together, because some are very large, like the Dumbarton Rail Corridor, and some are very small. I think there's one project that's simply removing a mailbox from the sidewalk, and that might be really important,
but it's hard to make sense of 190 or so projects when they range so much in size and without having some connection along routes and corridors, as Jen explained. So I'm really interested to hear from staff in the city to what extent we could successfully separate the two processes. Jen?
That was awesome. Thank you. I like the sort of packaging the projects together in that way. I would freely admit, I understand the tip in a way I did not before, thank you. I like the neat sort of division line and not allowing ourselves to be more thoughtful about some of the significant changes that are in there while not hampering us from collecting more money from people who want to add to it. But I really like the idea of packaging them together because it is so much like those, there are some fairly consistent routes that people take across the city. And I think one of the things that came up early in the conversation that this would sort of keep in mind is that, like, how do you, when you're looking at that sort of Willow traffic thing, how are you differentiating between somebody going to Fremont and somebody going to Bellhaven? Because we're all spending an hour to get across town. Like, if you're going to Fremont, you got another hour ahead of you. But like, how are we differentiating as we design those traffic plans and decide to benefit residents over non-residents? Like, when we're doing it as a route, it's easier to see how the impact to your neighborhood fits into a cross-city route that benefits everyone. So I think to the question about who it's benefiting, that piece.
Clarity.
Yes, so I would fully support that idea.
And I think there could be, I mean, I don't know how many routes or corridors or networks or packages we would do, and I don't know if that's something, I think staff was gonna take a stab at it, but then that's something that, you know, we could weigh on, Complete Streets could weigh on, community members could weigh on even what those networks are, and if they cover, you know, the 90%. And then I think we can, then people will have so much more access to it. And then we'll also be able to see, you know, the strength of because I'm also worried if we start ranking the individual projects or trees or whatever, and let's say 8 of them get a really high ranking, but 2 of them get a low ranking, and those actually packaged together as one route, then then the 8 might move forward, and then the other 2 are straggling 10 years later, and in the meantime, there's no relief.
Correct.
We don't get anything.
The 8 that you did, not as helpful.
So this is trying to show the clarity and help us understand what we can potentially, it helps to see the benefits. And then also, it helps when we're trying to make trade-offs of whether we're going to remove parking or we're going to put in a bike lane or whatever's going to happen. You can see the full network effect. So it's not just like we're giving up something for nothing. It's like, not necessarily Willow Road I'm talking about, but you see the full picture of the vision, and then that's
I would
easier to
say
communicate.
beyond the feeling, my fear is that we end up doing patchwork hope.
Right.
And this way we make sure that we implement something and we experience that as a real relief before we move to the next, rather than having it piecemeal. And as the red circle's not there, therefore it doesn't really make the benefit, because we don't want to waste time, money, and everything unless we're going to really feel the full benefit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying Oak Grove is perfect, but there's something very satisfying of having a complete, whether it's perfect or not, something that actually kind of goes from beginning to end, versus if that was 10 separate projects spread all over town, and nobody's getting nobody's really getting anything.
And in each of those 10 places, it's easy for person A to see like how it impacts them without seeing. So I feel like the package process has a way of making these traffic decisions more community oriented and less specific neighborhood and block oriented. Like, this is how it affects my block versus this is how it affects our community. Like, it just has a way of making it more cohesive and bringing people together over it. And yeah, so thanks.
Henry?
Thank you. So I have a suggestion, I think, but first I'd like to, if I may ask staff to confirm what I understand, which is that essentially we want to fund projects that we know we need to do. We establish a fee on developers in order to bring in money as development is done. But state law, if I understand it, requires that if you have that fee, you have to show why you're charging that fee. And is that a significant reason why we are establishing this list?
Yes, so I mean, we think that, yes. So the fact that we already did, we went out, we had engagement, getting, input from people. Then we've also met with the committee several times for their feedback on the recommendations. I think provides justification why we're doing these projects. So we can, we've also checked in with our city attorney that we could do this process where we could have kind of two separate tracks going on at the same time. So rather than doing what we had originally proposed of an adopted TMP first and then the updated TIF program, we could do kind of a work on the process of updating the TIF at the same time as working on prioritizing the actual list of projects, because the list of projects in the TIF do not need to be prioritized, they just need to be identified.
Right. And while I think perhaps bringing up the TIF in the Oversight Committee meeting, especially since it's a public meeting, just probably not adding clarity to what we're doing. The significant part of what we do and what the other residents expect is that we're out there solving problems. Since the TIF appears to be, if I understand comments the chair made, appears to be driving the schedule at this point, are we in a position, and would it assist for us to, all of us, see this list of 168 projects as just an assemblage of potential projects from every corner and for every purpose in Menlo Park regarding transportation, and that we could come to closure on these meetings at least, saying this is the group of 168 projects, but none of them has been specifically authorized by council, none of them are funded, and at this point they're not prioritized. I think that would be really important to move forward, because there are projects that people look at and say, you can't be serious. There are projects of the 168 that I looked at, and I imagine just about every committee member here looked at and said, that really shouldn't be on here. And just as there are projects that look like they're so important we should get right on them, usually seen through the color of the glasses that we're wearing at the moment. So if, I think if we're agreed, and we can with some confidence tell our neighbors that we are saying, yes, this is a list of projects, and now at least we all know what's in it. We will follow up with judgment on it on a project-by-project basis. It seems we could move forward. Agreement from others, perhaps? Does that make sense?
Andrew?
Thank you. A couple of points. One of clarification to the chair, to staff. The number that we need to come up with, which is the aggregate value of the improvements that we want to make to Menlo Park, is a number that we arrive at, and then we take net new trips associated with the upzoning and the correct Menlo process, and it's a math problem, right? It's going to cost $10 to do the improvements that we want to do. We've got 10 new trips, so it's $1 a trip, right? I don't get how you change that process. How do you get a 2 point? How do you bifurcate those? Are you able to comment on that? How's that different from the fundamental way this is set forward?
So I think what we're saying, so what our initial process was to go through the whole transportation master plan and adopt it. So where we are in the stages, we would need to then prioritize the projects. Once the committee and the community agree on the list of projects, then we would go through and prioritize them on what's, high, medium, and low priority. And then we would get to go to the council to adopt the master plan. But I think what we've heard from the committee is that.
I interrupt you, but in terms of process, so whatever comes out of that sausage making and out of council will have a number associated with it. In order to do X, whatever X looks like, there will be an aggregate infrastructure build number associated with it. Is that correct?
Yeah, but yes, we would develop
Yes.
cost estimates for all those projects. So there would be cost.
Right, the final sausage that comes out of council, okay. How do you change the process? So if you can't define what it is that sausage is going to cost, what's the end run around that to be able to develop a TIF structure if you don't know what it costs to make that?
No, we would still do the cost estimates.
Okay.
So what we're saying is rather than wait till we have a fully adopted transportation master plan, we would go with a defined list from, say tonight, if you agree with all the list of projects, and we would then develop cost estimates associated with that list and develop the fleet program based on that.
But 198 is very different. We've got tons in here. I mean, the whole concept here was we were going to come up with a universe of stuff. That stuff was going to go out to the community. The community was going to say, that doesn't work, that works, that doesn't work. And we kind of jumped the shark a little bit by giving the impression that what we have here today are things that are baked. This is nowhere near baked, right? And I think there's some perception by the community, rightfully so, that the cake is being baked and this is what's going to happen, when in fact we're a long way between concept and approval and delivery. So getting back to the original question, it's one thing to cost out 198 projects, right, and come up with a number versus the final 40 that make it through the gauntlet. How do you reconcile those? How do you reconcile those different numbers to be able to get to a TIF?
Okay. If I may. What's being suggested is a reordering of what our activities are without actually changing what our activities are. It's moving the TIF part of it forward to go on a parallel track. It doesn't change the TIF process. So let me start with that first. The projects that we have now, and I like how none of us can actually decide whether it's 190, 188, 177. There's a lot of projects.
A lot.
And as you'll see in a bit in the presentation, we've added more since you were last here. We've also removed some and we've modified some. There's a lot of projects. And we have rough costs in terms of how we group them right now that you've seen. We would refine that. We'd go through and do more detailed, conceptual cost estimates to get a sense of all those projects. And we'd get that ready to go into the TIF program, knowing also what the new trips are that would be attributable to new developments that we can then charge that. So should those developments come forward, they would be then assessed the new fee. At the same time, we move forward with, I'm not going to use TMP 2.0 because we don't have 1.0, but I get your point, is to change the structure and to format it into these groups and the packaging. And I'm very intrigued by that.
And to suck the tip out of it. Technical term.
It takes all my being out. Now, as the TIF moves forward, by the time that TIF is going to be ready for review by this group and by others, we will have a massaged list. Some things will come out, some things will be changed or whatever, because we're also in parallel working on the TMP and packaging them and getting through that scoring criteria and prioritization. We haven't gotten there yet. That was really what's coming next in the TMP process, was to take this package as it is now, which is a big lump package, and somehow we're going to say that
you know what, let's present this and get feedback from the public, much like we are here tonight on one project in particular that we're here to which is great feedback for us. We want that feedback on all projects. We got to get to that point where we get that feedback. We can take that feedback that we get from the community and then bring that into the parallel TMP process so that when that TMP list is adopted by the council, there's a fairly good assurance that this is the list we're going to go forward with. Will it be, 100% spot on? We hope so, but, if there's one or two things missing, it's not going to be critical. If there's one or two things that have to come in later on or get removed later on. Also, again, the discretion of staff and council to not move ahead on any particular project. But by moving them into a parallel track, it's not going to detract from the CHIP process or compromise it in some way. And the TMP parallel process can inform it in order to help make sure that that list that goes forward into the new CHIP is the correct list.
Okay, and
Does that answer your question?
part one. Part two,
Okay.
what I like, but also what I'm reticent about is what I like is the concept of projects, of being able to visualize start to finish what do we get from it. What I think bears emphasis is the projects that are in here are from a lot of work of assembling different previous proposals, ideas. I want to make sure that if we go, I don't think it'd be a wise use of resources as we go through and try to create these string of projects and I love the idea of connecting activity areas with network access, but using what we have. Because
Absolutely.
we've got this 100 X amount.
It's the same trees. My beautiful clip art image showed the same trees, but they were just bundled. So none of the work is for naught. It's great work.
Yes.
And we wouldn't be throwing anything, unless we decide that we wanted to get rid of it anyway, but the core is still there. It's just framing it.
Yes, and obliquely, we tried that through north, central, south.
Right.
Through that process. And we found that to be a little bit challenging too, because how did you cross? So how do I go from my neighborhood in the Willows?
Exactly.
Which, theoretically, I'm talking about it, right? Get out.
No, it's one of the things that help you.
Right.
Where are you
Get out of Willow Middlefield and get to Pete's Coffee. How do I do that? Well, now I go from two different areas. So creating that sense of doing that, I think, is a very valuable and worthy exercise.
Yeah, I think the north, central, south is probably a first pass at trying to do that, but what I found, as a committee member, let alone someone that just walked off the street into the meeting, was the poster boards are so daunting, still, with a third of the city, and it's just hard to engage with it, and so if we really want the community's feedback, and we really want, they seem to stumble upon the TMP. I mean, it sounds like the neighbors for Project 48 accidentally, basically, found out about this and came.
Well, if someone walked through our neighborhood and basically told us exactly.
But it wasn't this iterative feedback loop with the city. So we want a project at the end of the day that residents are going to be like, I had an opportunity and my voice was heard and I felt like I was there at the beginning. And I feel like this packaging idea, then you can identify, who's affected or who's potentially affected. So I run Parents for Safe Routes. For me, I send out emails to my listserv, hey, there's a TMP meeting where we're going to be talking about 130, probably nobody's here from that. And I did send one out last night, so I'm like, I stopped. I have sent out specific emails to 10 parents up in Sharon Heights around Montreux and said, pay attention to number 40 this, 70 that, and 80 that. But if we had the process doing that, and then those of us on outreach, those community members who are engaged, we can start this phone tree in the community where it's like, okay guys, hey, in the Willows, let's pay attention to projects 4 and 8 because those are ones that we really want to care about. It's much easier to wrap your head around. And council members, talk about representation, they can reach out to their constituents and say, hey guys, these are the ones that you should really pay attention to. And so I just think it helps from a resident standpoint to wrap their heads around it and to feel like that connect men, like those branding things. The like to feel like they understand what's being asked of them and what's being presented to give feedback on. That's the concept.
Chris?
I want to follow up. I'm still confused on Andrew's part one question, so just for clarification. So I'm going to state something that I think I understand. This is around the TIF, and then see if I have this right. So the way this was from last time is that there is a set of projects that cost $40 million. And there's an assessment that says that this percentage of those $40 million is attributable to the new development and the new impacts, so that 25%. And that was what was utilized then to figure out an exact number to charge per development. Not quite. Okay, so what is the relationship between having to come up with a list that is different between a list of 180, which costs X, and a list of 40, which costs Y, having to figure that out to get to be placed with both a percentage allocation, which would be different based on what's on the entirety of list X versus list Y, and then also a different cost to be able to get to a number that would be charged that would actually start triggering the money that would come into the city that we would use to pay for stuff. How does that work?
Okay. The list of projects will have a dollar sign, a bottom line, whatever it comes out to. $80 million, $100 million, whatever.
100 million, I can work on that.
Okay, let's use that just for a round number.
Great.
All right. If you knock the list down, if we decide, you know what, we don't want the list of 180 projects, we want to get it down to 40 projects. Well, obviously that number is no longer $100 million that we're refunding. We're now trying to fund $50 million.
Great, simple math. Okay, got it.
Simple math. So we have that, that's this over here. We have a dollar amount that we're trying to fund, whatever it is, based on the projects alone.
Right.
Separately, we have a set number of new trips attributable to new development based on Connect Menlo and the general plan.
Got it. So that percentage is done from a separate thing, not related to our
The
projects.
percentage has nothing to do with the money.
Fine.
The
got it.
percentage is, in the future, there'll be 10,000 trips traveling through Menlo Park every day, and half of those are attributable to new development.
Got it.
Okay? And that would be 5,000 trips. I'm making up numbers because we know those are low. But those 5,000 trips, that's what we can then say, okay, I've got $100 million divided by 5,000 trips. That means I have so many dollars per trip that I'm trying to put into the fee program.
Okay.
That's the math. That's it.
And then that is what drives to get to a number to charge people who have to pay into the fees.
Yes.
Okay, so here's then, this is great for what I needed to know for this point. So here's the, so I really like the idea. And I really like the idea conceptually where you could come up with a list, not rank it, have it be able to trigger all the money you needed, and then be able to have, and to essentially do the vision for a master plan for the city in the right way, which this has felt kind of clunky and it hasn't gotten, it's been confusing to folks. So I like all of that. The dilemma I'm struggling with is this, which is, on one level, it would be great just to keep the list at 200 projects, keep it at 500 projects. Because it's also my understanding that if we don't have a specific project on that list, get the list funded, come up with that project later on, yeah, we can still do it, but we can't do it with that funding. Is that correct?
That is correct unless you go through the
Right.
process.
So as a
again.
city council member,
Unless you bring it to council and it becomes part of the development agreement, there are ways to do it.
Or,
Yes,
as
but-
Mark said, add it to the TIF.
Exactly.
By going back.
You can just amend the TIF whenever.
Or you have to go through the whole process though,
It's,
so
there's a very set legal process that the state mandates through AB 1600, so it's not so simple to go through and just do like an amendment. You're basically going through the whole process and updating everything again.
for purposes of right now, and not having to get this all sorted out, conceptually, it'd be far better to have a project in this, funded potentially by the TIF, than to not have it and then discover the project later on, and then have to go through the development agreement, to open the TIF again, to beg for money from some grant from some other place, especially if it's a high-cost project in this mix. So that becomes a dilemma, is that there's one thing where you'd love to make this list as big as possible, but if you make this list as big as possible, it's now got the $100 million price tag. That $100 million price tag is real for the fees that are charged to folks that are coming into here. I suppose, parenthetical aside, if you're anti-development in this city, and I'm not commenting on that right now, that might be the right thing to do. Let's have a list of 500 things and make those fees go through the roof. I suppose you could utilize it in that kind of way, but I don't think that's the spirit of what we're trying to do here. So I get that what you've said to answer this is that it's not a dilemma because you see these things essentially still working concurrently so that they would land and end where you would still have to do the ranking, still have to do the choices, and then there is some kind of hope that we would have this other part that would catch up with it. I'll just point out that functionally I'm not sure how much that actually saves us, given that constraint from what we are doing right now. I think it could, I think the split, and I would support it, but I would just come back to that it's not simplified. Last point I make on this. One, perhaps the key reason it is not simplifying is around what has been raised. It's all around the cost benefit, but it's all around the confusion around congestion. And it's multiple people have said this on Project 48 that comes in, which is whose relief are we trying to get? Everybody in their comments talks about relief, and everybody knows that's related to congestion in this. On one level, that's in people's minds. Jen, you can, that's way overstated. And so I agree we have to step back and get clarity from the community about what this is trying to be and what these goals are, because they are interpreted differently from everybody. I think we have to do that no matter what. So I really support this effort to split it, because I think it gives us an opportunity to be able to clarify and to get the vision right for the community, and to get that set so you actually get the criteria that have some direction that actually can get you the cost-benefit analysis that would work. But I will point out that given the constraints and the timing and how we put it together, it's still going to be really complicated and really hard in all of this. So I'll stop on that.
I think the advantage of splitting up the TIF is a couple of months earlier on being able to implement the fees. But to your point, the other thing I'd like to bring up is what we're talking about. It's going to cost more money and take more time.
Say that again?
It will cost,
The
anytime
process.
anything is delayed, anytime anything takes more time, more staff time, it ends up costing more money to go through the process. And has staff looked at all into the amount of time that it would take to do this?
No, not yet. We would have to take some time to figure that out.
Okay. So then, to extend this, it would have to come before council?
Yes, that's correct. If the committee decides that they want to move forward with that.
So this would be a recommendation by the committee, but not written in stone. We would recommend, and then it would come before council, and council would evaluate it. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. It would also come with the change in the scope and cost as well at that time.
Okay.
Can I just ask a clarification? If we're still extending, anything we extend, by the way it's described, that you described and answered, is essentially extending the TIF and the TMP concurrently. Aren't we running into the same dilemma that we need to get the TIF done? Wasn't the idea was that we get the TIF done and then we could catch the TMP up later?
I believe the idea is the TIF stays on target and that this process for the projects continues longer. That's the split. Instead of doing this, it comes off along this side.
But I guess, you know,
I
to
mean,
the
correct me if
point
I'm
I
wrong.
just made, I don't see how that works. I don't get it. Because then we,
Okay, Andrew, did you want
I'm sorry, through the chair. Yeah, I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but I'm just trying to figure out what number we're gonna cue off of as the number that's gonna get divided by 10 trips. We know right now, based on the upzone, what would projected net new trips are, right? So that number, that's a correct statement, correct, Mark?
We got that number.
Right, so we have one input. The one input is the number of trips, and just for purpose of discussion, it's going to be 10. If we don't have the number we're dividing into, you can't mathematically set that number. So I don't understand what physics we're defining here in order to come up with the allocation per trip that we're going to assign. How am I missing that?
Well, Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't know how many specific groups there are.
Yeah.
That's step one.
No,
But
it's not the
but that's
groups, it's the
semantics,
specific-
that's
projects.
aggregation, this is the impact fee. How is it we can come up with the impact fee? I don't understand that process. If we don't know what the aggregate value of the improvements are that we agree upon. How's that happen? Staff?
So to answer that point, what, if this goes forward through council direction, we would then take the list of projects, or whatever the list is that we agree upon, and we would go through a cost estimation process at that time, and then come up with that. The way the program was envisioned initially is, would have been from this point, we take what we have, we go to the public, we vet it, we figure out how to then package that into a TMP. What this is suggesting is we slow that down a little bit before we bring it to the public for vetting, and we take the projects that we have, because we have a very robust, good list of projects, and we go through that cost estimation, and we come up with what that total number is, that dollar value. And at the same time, while we're working on the TMP and the packaging, getting that ready for outreach to the public, so we can get that vetted, to make sure that that project list that we're putting into the TIP is still a good list in case there's anything that needs to be tweaked. So it's advancing the TIF basically from a 2020 process into a 2019 process at this point in time, the way the schedule is laying out. So it moves that TIF process forward in time, but it doesn't come after the TMP is adopted by council. It actually would be moved up quite a bit in time.
So the
that
list
we
of
can get to
projects
that
would
number.
still be generic.
But the list of projects would represent a dollar value that we're, I don't care if it's, whatever we call it, X, Y, Z. We would have a number, a valuation that we're comfortable with. So, is that correct?
Yes.
So we can slot in and out the projects that we believe. So there's a little bit of hypothesis in terms of, okay, if it's $10. We'll benchmark $10 as the amount we need to get where we think we want to go, and then we can slide in what is an aggregate value of $10 over time. Is that a correct statement?
What you're describing is an element of flexibility within the program, kind of how Palo Alto did theirs, where instead of listing 180 projects, they actually said, hey, you know what, let's have a citywide bicycle improvements, something like that, very generic, $30 million. And then you actually have discretion as to what actually falls under that list. So it's kind of a clever thing. So you do have some flexibility on what comes in and out of that, so you can structure the TIP in a number of different ways and stay well within legal bounds to do that. Remember though, you're not locked into committing to build every one of those projects that's on the TIP. So the fact that it's on there just makes it eligible, and it brings in potential funding for it, but it doesn't lock it in and commit anything from actually happening. So you still maintain that authority as council.
Got it. And if the chair will indulge me for one other point. Okay. So what I like about a little extra time in this is data, right? And I think I know I certainly talked about it, some other people talked about it as well. Certainly I feel bereft of data as we're making these decisions. One of the comments was, we're going to know how many of 100 cars traveling through Menlo Park, how many are Menlo Park going through Menlo Park, were generated by the net new trips associated with development. I had a meeting with staff in October, mid-October, yeah, it was mid-October, where I voiced my level of uncomfort with going through this process without having the requisite data to make these decisions. Because we're making decisions not knowing who's going where and what's going where. And there's difficulties associated with getting this data, but I think this is worth revisiting that with any incremental time, because I want to drive home the point that we are making these 190 circulation element decisions with not a hint of data. I don't know on any of these routes who's going where, for what reason, where they're coming from, what the origination point is. There's no data anywhere here that I have at my fingertips to say, okay, great, that's a route that's worthwhile. Or how many, what does that particular route carry? And where does that fit in the prioritization criteria? So that's a frustration of mine, because I feel data, not just data light, data none, in terms of making decisions, and I have a high level of discomfort with that. So to the extent that that could be brought to bear in this process, in the incremental time, because I know it's on your minds as well, certainly would benefit, I think, the trust that the community has in what we're deciding on. Because I don't think anyone at this table can say they have, I won't speak for anyone else, but I see some heads nodding. We don't know what the flows are in this town. And to the question, who will we solving for, and what are our hard-earned, or what are developers' hard-earned, but are creative to the city, money being spent for, we really got to be able to say it was spent for Menlo Park residents in this way because we know that Menlo Park residents are doing this, right? Without that, I think it becomes harder to defend the particular programs and routes that we put together if we don't know who it benefits. And I think it adds integrity to the process. So I will again hang my hat on needing and wanting data, and as a planning commissioner, needing and wanting data, because we're making billion-dollar decisions without knowing where this stuff is going. Who's going where, who's responsible for what. So, thank you.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're Henry and, is it Chris and Jackie? Or
I think you got it.
I'm
I'm last.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see it.
Yeah.
So Henry and then Jackie. Okay.
We're not going to do it by height? Alphabetical? No. So, just as a sort of quick summary here, all this time we've been working on a grant application. We're listing all the things we're going to do over our 2 years at the university, and would you please give me the necessary $80,000 so that I can go to school for 2 years? And kind of what we're doing, right? We're establishing the TIF based on this list, but this list is really no more vetted than my grant application for engineering school. Somewhat more vetted.
The list,
Please,
the list is vetted in that a good deal of what's on that list comes from regional programs, development programs, EIRs, mitigations, other improvement programs that have already been put forth. Some things on the list already have partial funding. Some are funded, others are not. Other things on the list are new and created as part of this process through the OOC, through the public input. There's a lot of vetting that went into creating a list of that size already, that these are not new projects. Many of them are not new. Some of them, many of them, most of them have already been seen through whether it's Complete Street Commission or Planning Commission or City Council.
Like middle versus at El Camino.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of vetting already.
So, well, I'll tell you what glasses I wear. A major part of my office is project management for institutions. At the moment, I have, I think, at institutions, 6 projects, ranging from a couple of $40 million buildings to moving underground utilities. Public works, if you will. We address projects somewhat more rapidly than this process, of course. But we also start with a need that has risen forth, which I think the city has done here. We then clarify goals, and this is something this city has done, and we did with the downtown specific plan. And then the downtown specific plan, we looked at the big picture and we asked residents basic questions like, El Camino has a pretty much undeveloped north side, or east side, if you will. Should say east side. Would you like more action in town and use this as part of a revitalization of town? Would you like it to just lay as dirt lots? There were some who said yes. Would you like the city to buy it and make very expensive parks out of it? And filter through what the goals were. We did that first. And then we start talking about what projects could go there. So that when you talk about projects, you weren't talking about, well, shouldn't it just be a park? No, you got past that. Then when it came to specific projects, they were put forward under the guidelines, and they come to the planning commission, and they're either approved or they're not, and maybe they go to council, particularly if they have a development agreement in the big projects. That way, the specific projects were not burdened with 9 months of community meetings, times, in this case, I don't even remember at this point, 168 projects, 190 projects, some, whatever. 168 was the last number I had, but maybe it was 140 something. So I've got to ask, if we're going to just have this great big mesh bag with all these projects in here, and then we're going to estimate them, we're going to estimate them with or without them having been fully worked through. We work through all projects at my institution projects to make sure that we're approaching it the right way. Do you need a new well, or do you just need a new pump? Oh, you need a new pump and a main line, but that's not a new well. Factor of at least 10 difference in cost and probably in time. I sense that, for example, Project 48, this really hasn't been done. For the projects at the Willow Expressway, I'm sorry, well, that's a phrase you don't want to use, the Bayfront Expressway. I will just say there are 2 or 3 things worse that I could have said. They all have to do with politics. So there's a lot of work to be done. I hope that that's not going to involve a committee like this to work through maybe 40 of the list in order to really define these projects and make sure these projects aren't replacing the well when it turned out it only needed a pump and a pipe. But the projects need that attention. I would think they'll need that attention from Christiane and from Justin, but not from a committee of citizens. I'm hoping that that kind of work is not, frankly, going to be pushed off on the citizens, that it will be done at a professional staff level. Are we recognizing that? And if so, then these projects are not logically coming back to this group. And there will not be public hearings on each and every project, is what I'm getting. Am I right? Or what? How do you see it? How do you see it?
So all the projects would still need to go through their own kind of individual outreach and approval process. I mean, the council would still need to budget those projects in. So they would still need to go through an approval process. We wouldn't necessarily go through this committee anymore. I mean, once we've adopted kind of the list, the master plan, we would then be going out as projects come forward to the community and then to the approval process.
But will you be asking them how to design it, or will you have figured out to the best?
No. I mean, we would do some preliminary design. So what we've identified in the master plan is kind of like planning level kind of what's the trade-offs and what are sort of some things to look at. But when we go, once we've identified and we've been decided as projects and we go out to the community, then we have more, we would do more evaluation.
Well, I guess that's a hint as to what council is going to see in the next few years.
Okay. It's really, it's just me clarifying what I think I understand, because I've had like an aha moment. Thank you, Jen. That's really, I'm pretty sure the slideshow did it for me. So the, like this TMP thing, what I think I understand, and Chris, you sort of asked the same question. I feel like I'm just asking for my own little minutia of understanding. So we walked around Menlo Park and we looked at all the different infrastructure needs that our community has today. Like, given all the things that we noticed today, and all the problems, and we went to the outreach meetings and we solicited input from surveys, and we asked a bunch of people what things are concerning them today, so that we could look at that big list and come up with how much money we're gonna need for our infrastructure today, and of course going forward over time. And out of that list, we're gonna come up with how much money it's gonna cost for the infrastructure of Menlo Park to support what's going through it. And from that list of money, we decide how much to charge new developments so that we can pay for these infrastructure needs. And that secondarily, we're gonna be looking at this giant list of projects, which we used when we went all around town to look at what was wrong today. And out of that giant list of projects, once we figured out how much to charge developers, there will be continued discussion around how to prioritize which projects get done first, and putting them into routes so that as we prioritize them, we can make sure that we're doing a complete route and not just part of a route because this looks shinier than that. So, and that this final project will also take all the different plans that have been come up with in the last 10 years with the El Caminos, take all of those plans and fold them into our traffic thing instead of having to run every traffic decision through 4 different plans. Is that more or less what we have been doing? Like, is that the goal of what we're going to have it, sort of?
Yes.
All right, thanks.
Jen?
Well stated.
All right. So I think there's kind of two big things, and then the money thing. One is the goal of the TMP is safety, mobility, choice, and sustainability. It's not congestion relief, and that's one thing I want to put out there. And there was an editorial, I think Mr. Riggs wrote it, I think there was an article in the Almanac about it, and I think that's something that the city needs to really communicate. And so if you look at the TMP through the lens of, this is not congestion relief, congestion is regional, this is about circulation among residents and our visitors on our local streets to get to the places that we need to go within our city. Safely, efficiently, if all trade-offs, quickly, not hurting anyone, but efficiently. So first we have to make sure we're all set in the same place. And then for the relief, the little guy going, phew, for some, we're waiting for congestion relief, which the bad news is probably not coming. For me, the relief I want is that my kids can get to Hillview safely on a bike, or that these folks can cross the street to get to Willow's Market, or that the people in Bellhaven can hop on a shuttle to get to Safeway, which may or may not, it's the trade-offs. But I just feel like the city has been growing so much, and we're all feeling so tense and anxious, and we haven't seen anything kind of positive. This vibrancy hasn't come yet. Hopefully it's coming with some of the new things. So we're in this weird transition period where we're expanding and the peninsula is growing, but we haven't kind of tipped over yet with ways to get around instead of our single occupancy vehicles. And so for me, the TMP is, when I think of the relief of the TMP, it's like I actually am seeing paint on the ground and sidewalks that are going to facilitate my neighbors being able to get around town. And so that's just one thing I wanted to address. And then with the money and the TIF and making sure that the money is collected and used properly. And so my guess is that, there's a couple very controversial projects in here. One being Project 48, another being Bayfront Expressway. There's some projects on El Camino to put bike lanes, and there's some things in here that are hot potatoes. And my guess is those hot potatoes, they're never just going to be like implemented tomorrow, in the dark of night when nobody's paying attention. I pay attention, and I will let everybody know if that happens. So besides those, I'm guessing that 80% of this list, is probably pretty decent. So my question to staff, or good, I know you guys are really trying to all live with. So my question to staff is, I'm guessing that the big controversial projects are more of the big ticket item projects for a lot of them. I know, Bayfront Expressway and potentially doing these things. So we might not want to, for the remote chance that we might want to do some of them, we don't want to not have them on the list necessarily, although I hear what you're all saying. However, is there a way to manipulate what goes on the list to avoid controversy and to have the community accept that it's a good enough document for the purpose that we have, and how do we communicate that to everybody? I don't know if that was a clear question, but. So if we all pinky promise that this is just a good enough document, we don't take the money from the developers, right? You guys are not buying that. So what do we have to do? So then what are the requirements? So what is
Does that work for city council?
So what do we need to do to make it so everyone's comfortable? And do we, if we need, because I'm not actually comfortable, I don't feel like the community gets this. They don't understand. I don't feel like they're absorbing this and playing with it.
Can I just clarify that for you when you're asking the question? So it's not hard, okay? It's easy. One, this committee did not communicate to this community that you wanted our input on what you were doing. Okay, so that's the first thing, first element. The second element is that I don't know where it came from, but this Project 48 had the potential to destroy our community. Now, if that project is on that document is poison. Okay, burn it. Number one. Number two, okay, it also preempts any positive input from my community. Because with that project, on that piece of paper, we cannot tell you about crosswalks. We cannot tell you about traffic calming. We cannot tell you about electronic signage that could solve the emergency vehicle passage. Okay, we cannot tell you about any of those things with that project on that document. And the lousy publicity that this committee put forth for all of its meetings. And with no lead time, even for this meeting a few days ahead of time, posting not posting on the calendar when this meeting was scheduled. So that's part of the answer.
Are you guys open for comments now?
I would like to.
To the chair.
I'd be respectful. I would like to finish.
No, I'd actually recommend.
Or would you like us to do public comment?
I think the most important thing is the public input.
Absolutely.
And I think
so for public comment number 2, I believe we still need cards. So please fill out the cards, bring them in, and we're happy to take public comment. While we're doing that, I realize that most of this conversation, and I want to make sure that this stays on time because it's now 8:30. We will probably have to take a vote as to whether or not we want to extend this at this point. I see two things. One is, yes?
If I may, you saw an agenda of a 3-hour meeting. There's a lot of material which can be presented at the discretion of the OLC. There's also parts of it that do not necessarily have to be presented this evening. However, I just want to remind you, there are certain things in there which I think could be helpful and informative for the committee to see tonight.
Okay.
That we want to relay to you. It could help with decision-making both tonight and going forward at this particular juncture.
Okay. I have a process question as well, and this is my something that I'm putting forward for the committee to consider. We are restricted by the agenda on what we can vote on because it has to be noticed. So there is a limit to what we do. However, what has been agendized is us looking at the projects, and I've never really been convinced, to be honest with you, it's such a great idea to have buses going down Willow. And I think that a lot of the comment here illustrates some of the safety issues. We could pull that out of this as part of this process, because that is noticed for what we're here to do tonight, is to look at various projects that we say, this is particularly problematic, we're going to pull this out. And as I understand, as we're going through the grouping process, we will be pulling more out. And we will be refining them as this comes through. But I think that this is a key one that this evening we could pull from the list. But I also think that as we go through the grouping process, the prioritization process, things will be thrown out from there, and things will evolve into each other within that process. So anyway, I just want to let you think about that while we have some people come on stage.
But I'll pose this as a question. Do you want to, since you have 4 cards, now you've got 5 cards up.
Oh, sorry.
Do you want to give 60 seconds each to the committee members? Because I suspect these are all continuing on the discussion so far. Or do you want to come back after the...
Let's have some public comment, and then if you guys can think of how to, I know it's very difficult to speak in a short period rather than a long period, but think of how to summarize your questions and your comments to try and move forward, because there are more things that would be beneficial for everyone to see before we finish the...
Well, I can do mine in 30 seconds, so I suspect a couple others could too. No, maybe not. So I'm sorry, Andrew.
All right.
I shouldn't want to start.
Michael, who's Michael's last name?
John.
Michael?
John.
J-O-G?
Z-H-A-N-G.
John.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I live in Willow. Actually, thank you for our work to make the city better. And also my neighbors here, I think I really noticed seeing like a few days last weekend, my neighbors stopped by my home and then noticed this one. I feel like you are from our neighborhood, but still different from like you are living on Willow or not. So I think that's a different point. If you own Willow, you know your parking is gone and your house value going down, you feel the pain. Well, the difference, that's the difference. Okay. And another thing is, I'm from like a communist country. I'm from China originally, and in China it's kind of like a few people decide something, and harmful maybe for one group of people, make it good for the city, but then just go forward. Now it's kind of I'm feeling is like, okay, how about like, I think some of you guys are living in Menlo Park. How about we vote for your front yard, donate it to something for good? Do you think that's reasonable? And another thing is that I know like some of you guys like kind of got excited about like when we talk about funding and stuff. I think when you think about funding stuff, do like put some factor to the pain to the neighborhood. well, our house will be lower, and our parking is gone, and how to memorize those stuff. Yeah, that's it.
Omar, and then Bill. You already won. You got your 3 minutes. Go ahead.
So after hearing all this process, I think that the way it's all being managed is actually being managed backwards. Because it seems that you guys have a goal and a driver, right? And it looks like it's all money. And then what you guys started doing is you started filling a list, right? Because you keep saying the list. A list of things, of projects that you want to do. Now there's a difference between wanting and needing to do, right? And then after that, it looks like once you hit your goal and your target of what you want to do, and you have your funds assessed, then you go and sell it, or rattle the nest, which is what you have done, which is what you're doing right now. Right? So if you look at how big companies function when they deliver products, they first go and talk to the user. We aren't the users, we are the clients. And then you say, hey user, would you want to do this? Would you want me to involve this? And then you come with something called a marketing requirements document, right? Say, I went to the users, I think this is what they want to do. Now I'm going to sell this internally in the company so that I can build a product requirements document. But you guys did it the other way around. You guys went and actually had a list of features for a product. You invested money that if you had asked me, I wouldn't have paid money for the development team to do an assessment on a feature that I don't want to do. And so it looks like you have done this all backwards, right? And should have started from the community to say, hey, we want to solve the circulation problem, which I think that example that you get is incorrect, because you're basically saying, hey, what if someone from Bellhaven wants to go to Purchase Park? That person will not have a problem because the traffic is that way is not going to be an issue. I also want to comment out the fact that community outreach was 0, because I can give you a good example. Samtrans, when they said we want to do the bus route for 280, they actually sent papers. I received papers on my mailbox that says, hey, we want to do this. For this, I got 0. Oh, yeah. Wait, you said something about next door, but that's not community outreach. That's just like basically like me going to Facebook and saying, hey, right. But do I know for a fact that my community outreach is actually meeting the goal of what I'm supposed to do? So there was no outreach whatsoever. And another comment that I have for this gentleman is, actually don't take this backstage. Leave it here on the upfront so that people are actually aware of what's happening. Because the moment you take it backstage, to be honest, I don't care as a resident, I don't care if you waste my time. I'd rather come here and listen to what's going on than you taking it backstage and then, just suddenly bubbling up to something that I'm not comfortable with. So that's basically my comments.
Bill Barron?
No, my last.
Oh, yeah. Vineet Sharma?
Hi.
Well, seriously, you spoke. You started this off. Go ahead.
I live in 342 Willow. Again, I got notified about this meeting through some neighbors. I agree with a lot of the stuff that was presented today. I have 2 young children too, 4 and 8. One goes to Dr. Campus, and the other one we got to a school in Palo Alto because it's not working out. One of the things that my topic here is, I'm not going to repeat a bunch of the stuff they said, but that gentleman over there, I don't know your name. Mark. Okay. Mark, I think you mentioned that the whole TIF process is about raising revenue for the city, and like right now we're going to support like development and stuff like that. So it's probably a good thing to kind of insert this TIF process so that we can raise that revenue and you can use it for safety and all that stuff from all those projects, right? And then you also mentioned something like how Palo Alto handled it differently. I don't know if I missed, they basically had more generic ideas about justifying TIF. And I'm wondering if there is an alternative way that the law permits that will allow you to justify collecting the TIF, yet not list 180 projects that have not been vetted. Is there a way where you could say, sewer lines, list one, like you were describing, right? Bike lanes, price this much, and this might come down to a list of, because if you think about community, you can, all these line items may add up to maybe 20, 30 things that matter to human beings, as opposed to 180 projects. And maybe those 20 line items will give you the justification for the $40 million that you're trying to raise the TIF. So I would really encourage everyone to kind of figure out if there's an alternative way to basically get to the idea of revenue generation, if that's key here, and use a different justification route rather than, you know, a list of 180 unvetted projects that the community has a lot of emotions about. That's my idea. Thank you.
Well, this is really kind of the first meeting where we discussed TIF. This isn't being done for TIF. This is being done to increase mobility of people across town. TIF is only an issue in the sense that we have to consider that as part of the timeline and what Jen brought up. But this is not being done for TIF. This is being done to make movement across and around the city more functional and safer. And TIF is just part and parcel of how that comes forward. So I have a question for staff before we go back to this. This wasn't specifically, people didn't specifically knock on doors on any one specific street because this is a citywide process. And for better or worse, you were reaching out, you got over 1,000 people to give input up to this point, and we've had a lot of people going to the different meetings. If we put this forward into, putting this into packages, I guess would be the best way of phrasing this, as if we move forward as that part of the process, then does that then give us more of the ability to reach out specifically to neighborhoods to make sure that they are engaged as we put those routes together, because obviously at this point it has been a citywide process, not as specific to a specific area. And by doing it route by route, that would give us the focus to provide more feedback as we refine the ideas.
So I think that the grouping may make it easier to explain to the community about the different routes, but it'll still be a citywide document. So, I mean, we would be including all the projects in one document as opposed to targeting each.
Because obviously this isn't a Willows document, this is a Menlo Park document. It just specifically in that one problematic area. But as was brought up, there are other problematic areas too. Those people just aren't here. We've heard from them in previous meetings, and just because they're not here doesn't mean that they're not still in our memory and in our email boxes. And so rather than just addressing one, as we move forward this process, we need to make sure that we do address each of the streets that were impacted. And by going route by route, that will give us the platform to do better communication with the people impacted at each route. Is that correct, or are we getting too much in the minutia with that?
Well, I mean, I think it'll make it easier for people to understand what the projects are and where they're located. But we would still, I mean, it's still difficult because it's a citywide document. So unless we were going to have individual meetings for different areas.
I'm sorry, but public comments. We have to wait. Is it Diane or Chris?
It was me. It was me.
It was Chris and then Andrew.
Gotta get it out.
No, I was just, 5 points in under a minute. One, let's can Project 48. These people have been here multiple times. They care a lot about their community. It makes a world of sense to John's point before, it's never gonna pass any criteria in
I
this
second
mix.
that.
It should be gone. Point two, we need data, back to Andrew's point. The Barnes proposal on data is ridiculous. We need data on everything. We need data on what's gonna happen with people moving in different places. I presented and gave an update to the Environmental Quality Commission last night. Data on greenhouse gas emissions, all the check boxes on greenhouse gas emissions on this are nothing. Greenhouse gas emissions transportation is half of the cap goal that we have to get in this city, and it's fantastic to get people out of the car and onto a bike, but the total emission reduction from that is nothing. So you have to look at the supply side and demand side, which means looking at limiting single occupancy vehicles in this town if you're going to get to GHG reductions. And if you're not going to look at single occupancy vehicle reductions in this plan, then none of it is good for GHG, and you've got to come clean on it. So that's the second point. Third point is, yes, split these, TIF and TMP. On the TIF, the NEAT proposal is exactly right, and that's your point about Palo Alto, and that's how we should do it, and pretty much reverse engineer it. How much money do we want to get out of people? Then add them up on those things
dangerous.
and get it. So you're the city council member, you have to be a politician, I'm not. So that's that piece of it. So, and the fourth one is on the TMP. Yes, and we've got to get the TMP not only into the buckets, but we have to get a level up, which is understand values and goals. Back on the congestion point, right, it's not in there, except you look at the criteria proposed, you get 3 points for a massive project on congestion that will not eliminate congestion. You only get 1 point for anything that might be massive on GHG. So it's an illustration that the criteria have to be driven out of the values discussion. The values discussion has to come back to the community as well. 5 points, that's what we should do.
Thank you. Henry?
Thank you. I'll speak at what, I'll just agree that unfortunately 48 was not ready for prime time, and this was, there may be something to be done on Willow Road, but that ain't it. I wanted to respond a little bit to Jen, noting that congestion relief is something that we all need, but that's not a local issue. Some of it is a local issue, and sometimes the most immediately frustrating is local. And it may not be at the major traffic time, so when you're looking for, how big an effect can you have on how many people, but if you come to a red arrow at an intersection, everybody can go straight because it's green, but it's red arrow telling you that you are not trusted to turn left because you might suddenly decide to turn in front of oncoming traffic. Now in El Camino, there is no such issue, but throughout Menlo Park, we have red arrows and we sit there. And there's one that's a full minute that you'll sit there at 11 o'clock at night. I'll sit there on the way home tonight. These are things that we can handle here. And there are things also that we as a town could address more aggressively, and Kat would know better than I, but I've asked for a long time that we be aggressive with the state government and with the federal government about solving regional issues. Yes, we are not regional planners, and we're not paid to do regional planning, but we're on the business end of it, and we need to get out there and advocate. So there are some things that I think are local.
One traffic study we had showed that 82% of the traffic on El Camino was pass-through traffic.
Yes, it's not Menlo Park. But on the other hand, if they did that same study, possibly in Palo Alto, they would find at least 50% was not. And if you did it in Atherton, they would probably get 99% is not. It is a state highway, but that's...
Andrew?
Thank you. So through the chair to staff, I'm going to put you guys on the spot here. I sent out that message on September 23rd. We had a meeting on October 15th. There was 8 different data points I was looking for as it relates to traffic. What can you guys deliver on? And how do we get definitive on what of those data points you guys can provide when? How do we get that?
So I think one of the things that you're asking for is like daily traffic, and so we're working on that. We have some, we do have the data available. I mean, that's.
I didn't ask for daily traffic.
So I think.
Good guess. Right.
Traffic around the city, right? Like, I mean, there's volumes. I think traffic volumes.
Yeah, well, specifically, I mean,
And so we
I can
have-
read what they are. Will there be an opportunity for staff to go back in? We had a lengthy meeting about it, and look at those specific 6 points and say, yes, we can get this, no, we can't get this, we can get this to this point. How do we get definitive about that, so we know what may or may not be happening as it relates to data? How do we get there?
We can go back. I don't remember the exact 6 points that you had, so I'd have to go back and look at that.
And Mark, may I ask you, since from that meeting, did any, and Justin was in the meeting as well, what happened from that meeting onward?
Well, we discussed, I mean, there's certain data that's available to us that we have. Okay? There's certain things, an example that you brought up this evening, that we're not going to be able to provide. I'll give you that example. It's like, well, if we have this project, I want to know, like, how many vehicles are from Menlo Park versus how many are from somewhere else? Are we serving local residents versus someone from outside of Menlo Park? Is that a correct paraphrasing of the question?
It was specifically on, you know, of the 8 different things, one of them was on a particular corridor.
Right.
Can we get a sense of, be it Willow Road?
Right.
You know, we heard in Connect Menlo greater than 8 out of 10 cars need to originate and terminate in Menlo Park. So for some of these main corridors,
right,
one of the pieces of data was what's regional, what's local, which will in turn
So,
help us to figure out if we're spending money
If
elsewhere.
we were directed, and it's not within our scope and our fee structure within this process,
Right.
but to get to that data would take effort. It's not that it's not available. It's not within the bounds of what we're doing here, but it's interesting information. But we're talking about fairly extensive, regional modeling activity. So if you tell me, okay, if you want to put in a turn lane, if you want to do a specific improvement, and is that improvement going to serve, Menlo Park people or people from outside Menlo Park, and to what extent of each? There's no way to answer that. Just like there's no way to say, if you're going to build another building on Bayfront Expressway for a tech company, whoever it may be, how many of those folks are going to be from Menlo Park driving in and out of there versus somewhere else? We have a slide that actually shows like workers from Menlo Park, how many go to other places to work, and how many jobs come imported to Menlo Park, to give a sense of the imbalance, in terms of that. Other things that you're asking for, we've gone through and we've taken a look, and we've actually directed one of our consultants to take a better look at what does this mean in terms of like the Dunbarton corridor improvements. What will that mean in terms of like travel times and queues, and we're working our way through that. So certain things we can provide, and other things would take mountains of effort which are outside the bounds of what we have. And so we kind of looked at it from that perspective, knowing that, yes, there's a need and a desire to provide more information, more data, more credibility to back it up so that we can make those important decisions. I'll stop with that one.
Okay, so may I send to the chair the list of that I have, the 8 data points, and have staff respond in some way. We can get this, we can't get this. I know that there are restrictions on what we can and cannot get, and I understand in order to get that, you may have to push some people on council to prioritize that as part of this process. But getting a response back as it relates to, this is the data that we need, and here's why we need it, here we deliver, here's what we can't deliver, here's a time frame. I think that'd be tremendously
Can you
helpful.
send me the list, I'll give them the answer.
Thank you.
Okay. Diane?
Okay.
No, actually, it wasn't.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Go ahead.
I just want to point out, Jen, you made the point about congestion relief, and this isn't about congestion relief. And I want to remind people, 48 came up on our list. Now, we didn't say we were going to do it or not do it, or was it going to pass public muster. But if congestion relief was something that we all agreed that was going to be challenging, we were looking at 48 in the context of taking single occupancy vehicles off the road. If we do not do 48, which sounds like it's a consensus and it doesn't make a lot of sense, we also have to be mindful of projects which take single occupancy vehicles off the road. And ostensibly, that project was solving for that. So there has to be trade-offs as we go through this. That's not the right project, clearly, But we have to be figuring out how it is we do our grids, and there are gonna be there's gonna be some challenges in how we map that out. So let's be cognizant of that,
Because I said that's not my understanding of what Project 48 is for, just for the record.
to put bus lanes to encourage public transit.
It was essentially to skip buses over traffic.
Right.
The traffic congestion was going to stay there no matter what. It was supposed to be able to get buses.
Well,
So
yes,
that
to
you
make
would
the
choose
buses
the
smaller.
bus
So you can
because
choose
the
the
bus
bus.
goes faster, because currently,
Make it
there's
more
no reason to
attractive.
choose the bus because you sit in the same line.
May I make a suggestion?
Right.
So, in the interest of 1 minute before we're supposed to end. Traditionally, the chair doesn't second things. Traditionally, the chair opens it up to the members to second unless the chair feels that a second is really needed. In the interest of sticking with Robert's Rules of Order, you did make a motion. Would you like to repeat that?
You want to take care of the
Like, let's just
48
take care of it.
means, so
Let's
fine.
take care of the elephant in the room.
So I would be fine with removing 40. So I make the motion that we remove 48 as it's currently constructed from consideration for this list.
Do we have a second?
I second it.
All right, any discussion? Call the vote. All in favor of killing 48? That seems to be unanimous. Okay, all against?
No, I was.
Oh, okay, unanimous. 48 dead. There will be extensive outreach as to how to move forward on the issue.
Thank you.
All right. And? Yeah, okay, so I make a motion, or do I hear a motion to extend the meeting? Otherwise, get in now.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to extend.
Brought by
9:45.
to 9:45?
I can't stay.
Okay.
It's okay.
What's
So you can go on without me. I'm.
I move that we extend the meeting for these two comments and enough time for the chair to figure out how long we want to extend the meeting for.
Friendly amendment and to approve the minutes.
Till 9:30? You have to go now? Do we have quorum?
Yes, we need 6, so you would.
Okay. Would you, before you leave, would you like to do the minutes, or you have to leave now?
I can wait for the minutes.
Do you mind waiting until? Okay. So we will then address the minutes.
I'm good till 9.
Well, before we come in.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's always this balance between being respectful of hearing everyone's opinion and being respectful of people that
These are the
don't.
most comments about things.
Yeah, I mean, they're weekend brief, but they're a whole lot like so.
Okay.
I'm sorry? Okay, do we, is everyone in favor of extending the, what did we say, 9:30, 9:45?
9:45.
I have her till 10.
9:45.
I can only stay till 9.
It's 9 now.
And you can only stay, right?
Yeah, as soon as we.
So you're losing quorum with these two people.
So we'll leave quorum, we lose quorum at 9 o'clock.
Oh, that's that.
So we either end it now, or we give it 15 minutes, or however long you take to do
Well,
the,
I'll do 15, but I've got meetings in the morning I'm not prepared for.
okay? Huh? Okay, well,
Can we do a motion to extend to 9:15 and approve the minutes first?
whatever motion you want, yes. Is there a second? All right, all in favor? Okay,
So
I think that was unanimous.
So the minutes was first, or the comments were first? The minutes were first?
Minutes.
Okay. I would move all three as, and appreciate the effort for incorporating comments from city staff, both in how they structured it and also my concerns were addressed in all of them. So with that as a parenthetical side, I would move adoption as they've been presented to us for all 3 meetings.
Is there a second?
That long-winded.
All right, and all in favor? Unanimous? Now, before we lose quorum, would you like to make a motion?
I would like to make a motion.
Okay.
I might need help with this motion.
Okay.
But I'd like to move that we bifurcate in some way the TIF and what I call TMP 2.0 in a way that is, so this is where I'm not quite sure, I might need staff to help here, in a way that's TIF enabled. So I don't know, we might need to, I don't know if we need to look at the Palo Alto, I guess I have a comment.
Are you-
I'm not ready for the
Can I
motion.
suggest that
Motion to direct staff to do something.
the motion to direct staff to digest.
Explore the
to
bifurcation and
digest
explore
what you
our
said,
comments,
and it would have to come to council to extend
which you said,
finance and time to be able to do that.
yes.
And that would require us coming back together again?
We love each other.
Okay, is that what's true?
And reaches for his card.
I'm helping you out here without making your motion.
So yes, what Kat said, basically, I move to direct staff to address our bifurcation request and go to council with a recommendation of how to do that.
With related
funding and timing implications.
Okay,
I'll second that.
all right, seconded.
I'd like to comment on that.
Discussion,
Right, an offer. I think I love the idea. Help me to understand, so give direction to staff within that. What is it we're solving for? Tell me again what we're solving for and how we get there.
So without this packaging deal, the TIF is going to be a summation, we have to decide now.
The TMP is going to
Sorry,
be
the
that.
TMP is going to be this.
The project list,
Is,
more specifically, you have a project list in your hand.
right,
Okay.
right. I might be puttering out right now.
No, keep going.
Can I try to
Yeah, can Diane explain?
We have a project list that can stand in as a TIF list. Right now, that project list is not prioritized. It seems like we need a lot more analysis time and packaging time before we can prioritize the projects. Let's not let the prioritization process slow down the TIF.
Man. So there was a prioritization process that was laid out in the staff notes where we went through. So they went from criteria scoring to goal alignment to classification alignment, scored that, came with prioritization, low, medium, high. Within that came the categorization of completion horizon, short, medium, long term. You fundamentally have a problem if those were grouped by roots, right? If we started to do the metaphors of organic stuff in trees, right? And we started to create these roots, which allowed for greater visualization across geographical areas about what it would be solving for. Could this, as I just said, as it's called out in the staff report, could that method of scoring work with your conception of having these things be along routes to make it easier to understand and digest?
I don't see how you can score at the project level and end up with knowing what you're getting at the end of the day. Because if you score projects 17 to 23, which are random projects, how do you know, first of all, then those are gonna move towards a high, medium, low, short-term, long-term, medium term, or whatever. And how can the community react to what should be up and down, how the levers should be pulled?
Matt?
Yeah.
What if you just did a sweeping process? So you decided that, by way of your example, from Burgess to Ravens, or, Bellhaven, and you moved the projects associated with that, and you scoped those. So you said 4, 16, 24, 32, 52, 92, 72. Boom, that's that right there. And then you, without having to we know we've got quality projects in there somewhere. We know we're grouping them by what we're going to solve for, which is along a specific project area. We know we've got some skeleton of scoring mechanisms here, whether it's by criteria scoring, goal alignment, classification alignment. Can we not, by sweeping these random projects and not making them non-randomized, by having within a project, and then overlay some of the existing scoring ways?
I mean, the sweeping sounds like the packaging, but I think it's when to score, because my concern is if you're scoring the individual projects and then sweeping
As
them,
part of the group.
so then you're actually scoring the group, which is basically what I'm saying, I think.
I think so, and I think if you get more definitive in terms of directing staff in that way, now you've swept these randomized projects into an overall group, and then you've got a scoring mechanism
that's already in place. If you've got a fundamental problem with the scoring mechanism, that's one thing, but if you think the scoring mechanism is okay, but just not, they're not aggregated in ways that you can understand them, then it becomes more of a massaging of what fits in a particular project area.
Andrew, in
And I'll
the
leave it
interest
there.
of time, do you mind if they ask questions, and it might be that their questions come around to answer yours, and if not, then we can come back.
Yes, and I have no more questions other than to try to aid her
Okay.
in providing more direction to staff, because I think that ambiguity is not helpful for what we're trying to accomplish.
No, absolutely.
I'll leave it there.
Chris?
Go ahead, Henry, you go first.
Okay.
I was. So I need to ask, in response to Jen, similarly to Andrew, why? Except that from the perspective that the one thing we did clarify earlier is that this is just a great big basket of ideas. The individual projects are going to will have to be better identified, some cost analysis done, estimating. This is a whole process, and I don't see this as an appropriate use for the Oversight and Outreach Committee. I just don't see that. I think that's a wildly excessive process in a town that's already known for a rather heavy process. So I think when we have these projects, staff should be able, it's a professional staff, they went through a lot of university time to read this here, present to council a couple of things. Out of the 168, here are 25 or 30 that frankly they're low-hanging fruit. They don't take a lot of analysis. They take a phone call to get 3 bids, and they take allocating a mere $10,000 in today's world. That's small money, I guess. And then there will be the projects that string together to create a route, for example, or that specifically address making an alternative to single occupancy vehicles tempting. And I know, Chris, you probably didn't mean it, but it's not that we want to choke people who are driving to 6 different places on one trip in order to tell them they can't do that anymore. We want to give them options that are so tempting that they're going to say, I'm sick of taking the car and repairing it. So those 2 things would go to council. Council has the list of 168, can say, oh, by the way, what about this list so that this area can get to Hillview? I don't see why that cannot be a staff and council effort to prioritize. Then we go deeper and refine those projects so that things that were assumed needed to be done don't actually need to be done now, or were part of the sidewalk repair that's already in process. That's when they get thought out the way projects do. Somebody's assigned ownership and takes it through. I mean, when I have a project, I don't simply say, I need to connect points A and B. I go and walk points A and B and say, oh, that person will be affected. Oh, that bush will be affected.
Bye, Jackie, thank you. I knew you had to.
So I suggest that process, and Jen, I think your indication that they should be lumped is fantastic, and it's been heard, and I know Christiane has heard it and Mark has heard it, and that should go to council along with low-hanging fruit, and would council not be able to take it from there?
Hold on,
I'll defer.
So to me, it's what is the community expecting at the end of the day?
Absolutely,
Are they
hardly
expect-
anything in
So
here.
are they expecting a TIF list, a laundry list, or are they expecting a transportation master plan?
They're expecting
That's going-
relief. They've said so at 6 out of 7 meetings.
So this kind of goes back to how if to me, if they want this network of citywide connectivity, this transportation master plan, they're not, if it's just a laundry list of projects that they have a hard time relating to, I don't feel like they're gonna get what they think they're gonna get. And I don't know if council's gonna get what they think, you're on council, what they're gonna get. So I think that if we want to make it clear and be honest that this is really a TIF list that is not about a master plan, a roadmap of where the city is going for connectivity. Because to be honest, I've been told for the past few years, the TMP is coming. Don't worry about how kids are getting here and there. The TMP is coming. I wasn't told over the last year, the TIF is coming, the TIF is coming. And so I feel like we need to do, by we, I mean the city, the committee, the council, everyone needs to do a better job of communicating and being really clear and honest about what we're working towards and what we're getting. And so I can't believe we're a year into it and I don't feel like we have consensus of what we're even doing. And so for me, the only way I can wrap my head around it of getting that end result of a transportation master plan and having the community feel like they got to be a part of it is this packaging thing. So I might not be articulating the motion clearly. So I'd like staff to know if what I'm like to help me, because I'm not a motion expert. And if I'm wrong, if it's a TIF list, then let's just make it a TIF list, and it is what it is. That's my comment.
It feels to me that actually there's not a huge gap in these conversations, and a little bit about what Mark laid out before. And so I think to the direction, I get the project piece and the clustering piece, but I think the direction is actually to simply say, right now the next steps were to develop a scoring system to rank the list of projects. And I think our collective advice is that if we go to the place of trying to score right now, it will be a disaster. It will be a disaster in this committee who kind of knows a little what's going on, let alone to residents who have not somehow heard about Project 75 and are ready to come and organize in the same way that the folks on Willow Road did tonight. And so I think, I don't even know what 75 is. So, sorry, that was a side. So I think the direction is to take the spirit of a whole presentation we didn't see tonight, which could have a whole bunch of stuff that we were told might actually be helpful to us.
Sorry.
And that we should recognize that, you know, we didn't allow the team to help us do what we're supposed to do in here. And to back to Henry's point, to now trust that they can take this input and can hear what we're saying about the next step not being in the right order, but then can also make a recommendation back through about how to get that order right. And that there may be a way that the TIF can actually be done in a shorter term way. This is the Benite Palo Alto proposal that can get that done, which would allow that. So explore that. But that's at the direction of essentially explore bifurcation to be able to address this issue of sequencing so that then you can make a recommendation back. I don't know that it needs to extend the timeline or the money necessarily. Sure, if it has implications. But that's how I would leave this, which is a recommendation to say, don't go on the next step as proceeded. Do not start with ranking these projects. Please make a recommendation that actually says, what do we need to accomplish for the TIF and what do we need to accomplish for the TMP, and get those both directed in a way that relate to each other. They can work better for us in the community. That's how I would have a sense of what your proposal meant. And if that's what you mean, then I would vote for it.
To your end, when staff explained to me that tonight we were going to all agree on the scoring methodology and then staff would just go score them.
Really?
And I thought, yeah, that's not going to work. That would be hollow. And so I've already recommended to staff that we need another meeting because staff goes away and scores them and it still comes to us and we still need to look at these and refine them. And so what I hear you saying, and to Henry's point, you are professionals. We have people from Harvard on our staff that have master's degrees in transportation. And
they could be from Foothill and be phenomenal. I'm
yeah,
not sure Harvard is different, but at any rate, I appreciate it.
But my point being, that we can go between the two, and we can say, look, how we do the scoring methodology is this. There's a scoring methodology, but let's also do it within groups. Let's do it within, we can do it within what you're saying and incorporate that into how it comes forward to us. But I would put forward to you that we do need to have one meeting. With all the respect of what the staff can put together, we need another meeting to go through what they recommend in terms of And what we need to do now is give them direction on what to prepare. You know, do we want to
Maybe
take,
someone else to make the motion.
so do we want to take the idea of when they're putting together the scoring, doing it by route and doing it by that area?
I like that.
And then we can say, okay, in theory, on the umbrella level, this route with these ideas have been approved. Now, before they're implemented, we're going to refine this. Before we implement it to the marketing point, before you have a general umbrella idea, but you can still take that marketing plan and refine it as it's implemented in that particular culture, which you have in the different streets. And is that, okay, go, Andrew?
So, through the chair, question to staff. Up and down the peninsula, different communities have TIFs in place. You have a general sense of the range of TIF numbers per square foot for the communities, you know, north and south of us, right?
I've seen several.
Okay. So if we know how many trips, because it's already been called out in Connect Mental, how many trips are going to be, net new trips are going to be expected, right? And we already know, we have a sense of what the range is for what TIFs are up and down the peninsula. Are both those statements true? A general sense of what TIFs are per square foot on the peninsula?
Not off the top of my head, but it's easy
Well,
enough to
we
look
can
it
find
up.
it.
You can Google it in a second, yeah.
Okay, so we have, very quickly, we could assess what we think our bucket of money is, correct? Taking net new trips that are called out in Connect Menlo, taking a generalized TIF per square foot. Tomorrow, we could know whether we're talking about 100 million, 40 million, 60 million, because we're gonna make the assumption that Menlo Park is gonna be somewhat competitive, somewhat within range in the highs or lows. So we could know tomorrow, ostensibly, that we have X amount of dollars within 25% either way. Is that a correct statement?
No.
It's not.
I wouldn't recommend, as a consultant to the city on this project, I wouldn't recommend going about it that way.
Well, not that, but just in the sense of, so getting back to the idea of creating a bucket, right? Creating if we have to create a bucket of money, which is $50 million, and then we allocate in later, because that's the best way to do this while we're doing the other parts of creating the routes. We can come up with a general sense of how much in general money. We'll get more specific as we go along, but we know whether we're talking about 100 million or 10 million. We can have a general idea of what that bucket's going to be, correct?
That's
general. Okay.
Yes.
So, and that can kind of lead, as we go through this, contextualize whether it's 198 projects times, you know, whether we're talking about 200 million, we can quickly come up with, or whether we really should be in that, whether we're going to end up with $50 million. So could we have a plan, or could we start thinking about a framework where we have a $50 million allocation, for the purposes of example, and then do that fill-in later of the projects that come in and the projects that we like? Is that a workable plan?
They do serve a purpose, right?
Again, process-wise, it makes it difficult because you're backfilling in those projects, and you're saying, let's say you want to fund, you have a target of $50 million, but you may have $100 million in needs. So now you got to figure out what's in and what's out. And that's generally done through some level of prioritization process or through some other mechanism. What we have at this point is we say, we have a general range of what we think the total needs are. And we have a series of mostly vetted projects that, add up to that number. Okay? You still have the ability to say, well, let's go through these and pull some out or add some in. We've been going through, that's what the process has been for months and months of what we've been doing through this meeting. I haven't been part of a TIF project where you start off with a certain target in mind where you then say, okay, now let's just fill in up to like $50 million to projects. Generally, the process is going to be, we know we have so much funding need. The council makes a policy decision that says, we want to fund all of this through TIF, or we're going to say, you know what, if we do that and we come up with this amount, let's say it's, God, now we got to spend $100,000 in a dwelling unit. It's not that, but I mean, let's say it was absurd like that, and say, that won't fly. We won't be getting any development if we do that. It's not competitive with other neighboring communities. So then the council will go through this iterative process and have that debate to say, we want something in this range, that's what's palatable, and so therefore we're funding 75 instead of $100 million because it brings the numbers down into something that makes sense. That's where the iterative process comes in at a policy and the debate level of council. You don't go in with that going up front because you're you're gonna shoot yourself in the foot.
And I'm just to close, I wouldn't have brought that up if we weren't trying to do this 2.0 thing, where we're trying to run concurrent things.
Right.
But I'll leave that there. Well, thank you for that. Other than that, I like your idea of grouping and ranking.
Okay,
and-
so I have a quick clarification. I've been told, I haven't seen it, that Redwood City's TMP is a list of projects, as was,
Redwood City moves that document.
yes, that Redwood City's had what we were originally talking about, just a list of, these are all the cool things we could do, 180 or whatever their number is, and I put forward. Is what we're requesting in terms of grouping for routes doable within the scope of what you normally do as a consultant doing TMPs? That's kind of a key question.
Yeah, we haven't done it in that fashion before. I can see how it becomes more easily understood and packaged. And whether that is by routes or by mode or by area of city, there's a number of ways to group it. Don't limit it to just routes, because there's a lot of things that are not route specific. But basically looking at it in terms of grouping things. In my head tonight, what I've been thinking of is, we got to put all of this into like a relational database. We can say, show me all the bike projects. Boom. Show me all the bike projects on Willow. Show me all projects on Willow. Show me everything that's in the Belhaven neighborhood. Show me everything that's school related. Just cross-referencing everything every which way and building that kind of thing. I think that's how I would envision kind of getting there, so that then we can kind of see where these things fit as packages.
How many meetings do you think it'll take us to do that?
With this group?
2 years.
I'm thinking like, one more hour and we're there. You know what? It's a tough process.
Can we do it in 2 meetings?
I think we can do it in 2 meetings.
I think we're going to need a scoping meeting. We're going to need a scoping meeting, and then we're going to need a finalization meeting, minimally. Could we do it in 2 meetings?
I think if we focus just on that and nothing else, we can do that. Okay? But I will say this, and I'll be very frank. We provide the OOC with a lot of material. You know that, because you get, and what we need is to be able to make sure that, and I think you guys are doing a good job, I honestly do. But it requires that homework to be done coming in and being ready from the get-go, and it takes out some of the questions up ahead of time so that we're ready there and to like roll up sleeves and work. Those kinds of meetings are very effective and you get through the process. It also is incumbent upon us to make sure that you have the material in whatever time you need in advance so that you can go through it and make sure that you're ready. And that's been done to varying levels throughout this whole process because of the kind of process it is. There's a lot there. So in order to get through it, that's what it takes.
Okay. In the interest of finishing this meeting in 3 minutes, do I have a motion?
Yes.
Okay, what's your motion?
Okay, Diane, help me out with this, full disclosure. Okay, I move that the staff explores, potentially, explores moving forward to bifurcate.
Do they explore or they do it?
That they find a process to move forward, I'm learning, to bifurcate the TIF and the TMP, and to allow more time for project grouping, analyzation, and prioritization. And then they also explore how Palo Alto did their TIF, and if that could be an appropriate way for Menlo Park. And in addition, to answer a data request that Andrew brought up, and timing and implications.
With a view to possibly 2 more meetings too.
And potentially adding 2 more.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Now, discussion. I have a card. Sandra?
I'm going to be very brief right now. And also, I'm sure that all of us are pretty tired. And thank you very much for what you've done. It's very much appreciated. But I would like to say that the project as a whole, having been a consultant, and as I am an economist, it's a consultant's dream. Because the more that comes their way that they have to do, that might not be exactly necessary, the more, speaking as a consultant, the happier I would be as a consultant. So lots of times when you do projects,
and you think smart in the beginning, you can save money. Sometimes you can save a great deal of money. So that's one point, just as a resident of Menlo Park, that I'd like to make. The second point is that in doing cost-benefit analysis, which I have done, considerable number of cost-benefit analyses, as long as you have the right criteria and you spend your time on the criteria, then you can weed your way through the projects that are under consideration rapidly. The final point is 192 projects. Sounds like a lot. And I wonder what other cities have done in addition to Palo Alto. So what is the history behind looking at this vast number of projects instead of making decisions a little more rapidly? So, thank you.
I'd be interested to know how many were in Redwood City. Bill?
So first,
And if we can, I know, I want you to speak, but.
It can, on Redwood City, the answer is 0 in their plan. It's a transportation management plan, it doesn't have specific projects in it. So-
Yes,
Yeah, it does, actually. I know for a fact it does, but anyway. Bill,
okay, this is easy. First, thank you all for, one, listening to us, and two, for your public service. I really appreciate it. My neighbors appreciate it. So just a couple of thoughts and a couple of questions. As far as reducing congestion, change the lifestyle. So you might consider, for instance, a program for incentivizing people to use delivery services. It gets the cars off the road. I don't know what, it's just off the top of my head. I think I would be more inclined to think lifestyle than I would think about roads. That's one thing. The other thing is that now that we've gotten rid of the toxic substance, I'd like to know how my neighbors can provide positive input for issues concerned with Willow Road. So that's a question. And the other thing is there is the misclassification. You have the little graphic there for Willow Road. And I would appreciate it if this body could recommend to council that that classification be changed in the circulation plan and it doesn't go.
that would go through the transportation committee, but I'll pass it on to them.
Okay, great. I'm done. Thank you.
Apologize.
I know.
I need my answers.
No, it's 140 in Redwood City.
140, thank you.
Slackers.
We have more.
Henry?
Oh, God, I don't remember.
All right, so can we call the question?
Yeah.
All right. We've got a move, we've got a second. It was-
I got the answer, but I need an answer. I asked a question. The question was, how can we provide positive input?
I'll tell you after we take the vote. That's a longer conversation. All right. Call the question?
Sure.
All right. All those in favor of the motion at hand? Seeing it's unanimous, it passes. So just for clarification, this isn't written in stone that this is passed. It will now then be written into a staff report and it will go to the city council for them to review this and make their determination on how to move forward.
And aren't you all glad you spent your evening here?
It was worth it.
The first half
I would do another meeting.
All right, do we have any other
400 pages in one
announcements?
night.
I move we adjourn.
All right, any second?
Second.
All right, done.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.
One of the most frustrating things that we find is that we do send out emails, we do send out.
I don't think that's an help, so right. Sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
like been like
Well, I feel like
I have it.
It's essentially, if you read the very first piece, it says this is transportation management. It's designed to create an understanding, a community engagement, and a way to think through all these projects. Then you have to take more deep